Chapter 2:15. The Great Xia army didn't expect that their deployment had been completely exposed. Furthermore, they didn't expect that there were drones in this world. They were still waiting there bitterly. The drone was too small at an altitude of a few hundred meters, and it didn't have any aura, so it was very difficult to detect. Even if there was a buzzing sound, they would think it was made by mosquitoes because the sound was too soft because it was too far away. Renbaqian and a few captains were gathered in a circle. If it weren't for the drone that recorded everything, they would have stepped into a trap even if they knew it was a trap without looking back. The way of thinking of the Aboriginals was to not care about what was in front of them or what was under their feet. They would just trample over it. It was not without reason that the Aboriginals' population did not increase much in the 70 years since the founding of the nation. Although their confidence and their strength allowed them to be fearless, there were many times when they would become a sharp blade in the hands of their opponents. Just like this time, if they had directly stepped in, then even if they killed all the opponents, their mounts would have died, and there would have been a certain number of casualties. Afterwards, when he had to walk to the falling moon gorge, his physical strength and other aspects would definitely decrease. If he had to face the obstruction of the falling moon gorge, he would be in great danger. Fortunately, they had discovered it in advance. Earth's technology and drones had contributed. Your Majesty, let me take 50 people in and kill all the archers in the front. The others will circle around from the sides. As long as we kill all the people who are preparing to ignite the fire, their preparations will not be a threat. As long as the forest at the foot of the mountain doesn't catch fire, even if they set it on fire, we'll still be able to retreat in time, Xinghu requested. And then? The forest is full of fallen leaves. As long as they catch fire, they won't be extinguished in a short period of time, Renbaqian interrupted. Then what should we do? Xinghu turned his head and glared at him. His eyes were like copper bells. There's no use glaring at me. You should think of a better solution, Renbaqian said as he casually waved his hand. When he first arrived in Dayo, he saw that the Aboriginals were all tall, strong, and valiant. After a long time, he had gotten used to it. It was unlikely that they would bite him. If we take a detour, it will take more than half a day. However, the mounts won't be able to last that long. They also need to rest, so I'm afraid we'll have to walk for another day. One more day of delay means one more day of preparation for the falling moon gorge, Li Tanhua said. When Renbaqian used the drone to take pictures just now, he noticed that the mountains on both sides were very steep, and only the mountain pass in the middle could be accessed. This was probably the reason why they were stuck there. Can't we take other routes? Renbaqian pondered for a while and asked. He didn't understand the geography of Great Xia at all. If they could avoid the ambush here and the falling moon gorge by changing the route, it would be worth it even if they had to delay for a few more days. Why should they fight recklessly? Even if we pass through here, the falling moon gorge will not be easy to cross. The other way is to walk through the broken dragon platform. That place is even more difficult to pass. Ting Ji shook his head and said. No matter what is blocking Her Majesty's way, the winged cavalry will advance courageously and break through everything. His voice became firm again. Renbaqian looked at him from the corner of his eyes. There was only one way left, and that was to make sure that they didn't even have the chance to set the fire. Your Majesty, why don't we use the sarin and shoot it with arrows? Renbaqian said to the Empress. As long as the archers in the forest were cleared out, he would let someone tie the sarin to the bow and shoot it to the mountainside. Presumably, they wouldn't set the fire until the winged cavalry killed their way over. After half an hour, they would be able to swagger through the forest. The only drawback was that it was a little painful. The remaining sarin was only 10 kilograms and 20 bottles. According to the pictures taken just now, they would need at least 6 bottles to envelop most of them within the range of the poisonous gas. The Empress sat on Qi Shui's back and listened to them. Finally, she nodded her head and said, "Let's do as Deputy Prefect Rin said. Split into 3 teams and each team will have 50 people. Clear out the great Xia soldiers in the forest and bring me a bow." "Yes, Your Majesty." Once the Empress gave the order, the 3 of them immediately obeyed. They first went to find the best bow for the Empress. It was a cow horn bow made from bamboo, cow horns, and animal tendons. There was also a bag of metal arrows. In Deo, bone arrows were very common. It was easy to obtain materials, but metal arrows were relatively rare. This set of bow and arrows belonged to Li Tanhua. Normally, he wouldn't bear to use those arrows. The Empress knocked an arrow and aimed at the sky. Just as the imposing aura rose from her body, she suddenly dropped it. Everyone only heard the vibrating sound of the bowstring. In the next second, a bird directly fell from the sky. Someone ran over to pick it up and saw that there was a hole in the bird's body. However, the arrow was nowhere to be found. Soon after, the 3 of them led 50 people each and an additional 50 people to follow behind them. They ran all the way until they were 500 meters away from the forest. The maximum range of the Manwul archers in the Great Xia army was 800 steps, which was equivalent to 400 meters. At this moment, everyone stopped their mounts outside the firing range, flipped over and landed on the ground. Then, they pulled out their swords and screamed as they ran wildly into the forest. The 50 people behind them were in charge of guarding the mounts. When the distance between the 150 people and the forest was reduced to 350 meters, a sound was heard from the forest. Hundreds of arrows pierced through the air and shot out from the forest with a cold glint. Ting Chi took the lead and brandished his long sword to cut down all the arrows that were shot at him. Following which, he leaped more than 20 meters away. These winged cavalry warriors were equipped with weapons and leather armor. It only took them 7 or 8 seconds to run 100 meters. Furthermore, they still had energy to spare. The other party shot a total of 2 rounds of arrows and quickly fled toward the mountain pass. When the 150 winged cavalry warriors reached the forest, they split into 3 teams. 2 of the teams headed toward the 2 sides to clear out the archers that were lying in ambush on the trees. Only 1 team chased after those archers and stopped when they were about to leave the forest. The Great Xia soldiers that were lying in ambush on the mountainside were originally ready to shoot their arrows. However, when they realized that no one was coming out, they raised their bows and remained motionless. "Sir, only 100 of them came in. The rest are still outside." Lu Kanjun hurriedly ran to the mountainside and reported to a military commandant with a 3-foot-long beard who looked more like a scholar than a general. Even though this military commandant looked like a scholar, Lu Kanjun didn't dare to look down on him. One had to know that this military commandant was already at the advanced stages of the Earth Will level, which was equivalent to the Earth Embryo realm. In Great Xia, he could be considered an expert. The military commandant frowned slightly. He didn't expect that the other party would actually give him such a difficult problem. More than 100 people had entered the forest. Should they start the fire or not? After thinking for a while, he opened his mouth and said, "Increase your vigilance. When they appear, use boulders and rolling logs to block them. 4,000 people have the geographical advantage. How could they not be a match for more than 100 people? As long as they are slightly hindered, the follow-up troops will come in and set the forest on fire." However, he didn't see any winged cavalry soldiers. Instead, he saw a long arrow that was shot not far away and a bottle that was tied to the arrow. As the glass bottle shattered and fell to the ground, some colorless and transparent liquid sputtered in the surroundings. The volatilized gas began to pervade this space and diffuse into the surroundings along with the mountain breeze. Renbaqian and the Empress used a pair of binoculars to look at the people on the mountainside in the distance. Behind them were many winged cavalry warriors. After a while, Renbochin saw through the binoculars that the soldiers on the mountainside were clutching their throats and falling to the ground. The others began to flee in panic, but they also fell to the ground after taking a few steps. The facial expression of the highest-ranking general changed drastically. However, it was too late for him to realize that something was wrong. In a flash, he appeared more than 10 meters away and leaped up again. It seemed like he wanted to escape from the poisonous gases range from a high place, but he fell to the ground after jumping halfway. After a while, everyone gave themselves and their mounts the antidote and swaggered through the mountain pass. On both sides of the mountainside were prepared rolling logs, boulders, and corpses that were scattered all over. Previously, someone had opened a wooden barrel that was hidden in the forest and it was indeed filled with animal fat. These arrangements could be said to be ruthless, but it was a pity that they didn't have the time to use it. Thousands of Great Xia soldiers died just like that in a short period of time. At this moment, everyone looked at Renbochin with a strange gaze. Previously, they thought that Renbochin had a lot of good stuff. Now, they realized that Renbochin had a lot of things that could kill people. To silently poison thousands of people to death, that Great Xia general was an advanced earth will expert. There were also a few earth will experts around him, but none of them managed to escape. All of them were poisoned to death. Witnessing such a scene with their own eyes, they felt a little more reverence for Renbochin. They thought that if they were to become enemies with him one day, they would shoot him to death regardless of the consequences. Out of the 4,000 elite soldiers at the mountain pass, only about 100 managed to escape from the poisonous sarin gas. This news was sent back to Yu City and then to the rest of Great Xia. Great Xia began to investigate who was the one who poisoned them. After being enemies with Dayo for so many years, they had never encountered such an incident. The aboriginals had always relied on their strong individual strength to crush their way through. They didn't easily poison thousands of people to death before swaggering over. Previously, Qi Zixiao poisoned the entire 9 pavilions, but the internal department of Great Xia didn't believe it. This was because the person who understood you the most was your enemy. Qi Zixiao didn't know how to use poison at all. Poisoning the entire 9 pavilions wasn't something that a person who didn't know how to use poison could achieve with just a little poison. It wasn't just 1 or 2 people, 10 or 100 people, but thousands of people who were in combat mode. The weakest among them was at the man-will level, and there were even spirit-will experts like the 8 pavilion masters. This time, she even poisoned 4,000 elite Great Xia soldiers who were lying in ambush at the mountain pass. Both times, the death toll was huge. Similarly, they were silently poisoned to death in an open space when they were completely awake. There must be someone else beside her, a poison expert. This was everyone's conjecture. Very soon, Renbochin, who everyone thought was a lucky gigolo, appeared in front of everyone. If there was anyone who was the most suspicious, it would be Renbochin, who suddenly appeared out of nowhere. The Empress also brought him to the 9 pavilions alone. The Empress appeared in the 9 pavilions, but his whereabouts were unknown. Just like that, Renbochin became famous in a way that even he didn't know and became a scapegoat. Poison Warrior. Chapter 216. Renbochin sat on Qi Shui's back in a daze. He felt that he was like Xuanzang who went on a pilgrimage. He had just defeated the one-horned king, and now, he was ready to go to the blazing mountain. It was a pity that Hong Haier wasn't waiting there, and there was also no Shao Tian under the moonlight. After thinking about it carefully, even if there was, he wasn't Sun Wukong. Fortunately, the Empress wasn't Xuanzang either. The group of people walked in the mountains for a day. In front of them was a very tall mountain peak. After climbing over it, they would reach the falling moon gorge. After that, they would be able to return to Dayo. The 3 captains were finally tired of playing with the binoculars. They no longer had to tie the binoculars to their heads like before. However, their gazes shifted to the bags hanging on both sides of Qi Shui. At least one of the bags contained that thing called a drone. It was a pity that they weren't allowed to touch it, and this made the three of them very resentful. Sigh. Renbachien, who was in a daze, cried out in alarm. Qi Shui suddenly leaped and almost threw him off. Just as his voice left his mouth, he felt a force pressing him down on Qi Shui's back. "Thank you, Your Majesty." Renbachien turned his head and smiled at the Empress. The sunlight that shone on the treetop seemed to fall down after being smashed. Specks of sunlight shone on the Empress's body. The Empress was wearing earphones and listening to music from a music player. This was considered a form of entertainment during the journey. The sunlight that shone on her body, the earphones, the music, and her relaxed expression made the Empress look like a girl under the shade of a tree in a schoolyard. It would be even better if there weren't that group of people looking at them from time to time. At this moment, there were actually 2 empty mounts. Renbachien didn't think of changing mounts, and the Empress didn't chase him off either. This was considered as tacit agreement that the 2 of them were riding on the same mount. Both of them also addressed each other as Her Majesty and Renbachien. They didn't talk much on normal days, but there seemed to be a certain atmosphere between the 2 of them that isolated the rest of the people. This made many winged cavalry warriors feel like they had eaten a mouthful of dog food every time they looked at them. More than one of them was thinking of going to the mountains to find a woman they liked and getting married after they returned. After another day, they climbed over the mountain in front of them. After descending the mountain, there was a large river. The water's surface was hundreds of meters wide, and the current was rapid. The sound of the river could be heard from afar. "There's someone on the other side," Ting Ji shouted from the side. Renbachien raised his binoculars. Sure enough, there was a great Xia soldier on a horse looking over at them. It seemed like he was specially waiting here. Turning the binoculars to the side, he could see that not far upstream and downstream, there was a soldier following them. "It's specially waiting for us," Li Tanhua said casually. He reached out to touch the bow but found nothing. Only then did he remember that the bow was still in the Empress's hands. The Empress didn't care that they were watching. In any case, she couldn't hide it from them, so she just let them be. Renbachien went forward to take a closer look at the river. It was very muddy. After all, the current was so rapid that it would definitely bring up the mud in the river. It was impossible to see the bottom of the river. "Deputy Prefect Ren, be careful. There are strange fishes in the water," Ting Ji reminded him. Now, Renbachien was a fragrant steamed bun again. "What kind of strange fish are they?" Renbachien turned his head and asked. He wondered if there were piranhas. However, it was not impossible. If they could be found on Earth, it was not surprising that they could be found here as well. At this moment, the sound of something breaking through the water came from behind him. "Be careful." Ting Ji's facial expression suddenly changed and he pounced towards Renbachien. However, a red shadow was faster than him and appeared beside Renbachien in a flash. When Renbachien heard the sound of something breaking through the water, he turned his head and just happened to see a huge fish head swallowing him. Yes, it was swallowing. The fish's mouth was like a bird's. It was very long and filled with fangs. Its body was round. This fish looked as if a bird's mouth was installed on the fish's body. It was ugly and ferocious. Renbachien's heart immediately trembled and he took a step back. In the next second, a spotlessly white hand stretched out from Renbachien's side and directly slapped the fish's mouth that was trying to bite him. That fish head looked as if it was smashed by a heavy object and was directly knocked out of the water. The 5 to 6 meters long fish body spun in the air. Just when the fish tail was about to swing near the Empress, it was slapped on its body. Its body immediately exploded in the direction of the big river, spitting out a lot of flesh and blood. Together with the fish body, it fell into the middle of the big river. Very quickly, another 5 to 6 dorsal fins appeared in the middle of the big river. The river water was also dyed red with blood. Renbochin only calmed down after a long time. He was really frightened just now. It was too sudden. He didn't expect that when he was standing by the river, that thing would dare to stretch its head out to swallow him. It was simply terrifying. If it wasn't for the Empress, he would have to be fed to the fish today. At this moment, the Empress had already returned to Qi Shui's back and was in a daze. It was as if nothing had happened. Deputy Prefect Ren, hee. Tingji winked at Renbochin and grinned. In the next second, he felt something flying past the tip of his nose along with the sound of the wind. It scared him so much that he broke out in cold sweat. The Empress lowered her head and looked at her palm. Her throat was crooked again. After this incident, Renbochin became well-behaved and didn't dare to run around anymore. This world was too dangerous. Everyone immediately set up camp here. After informing the Empress, Renbochin found a secluded place and returned to Earth. After staying on Earth for 2.5 days, he brought back a lot of things. Among them, there were 1,000 sets of antidotes. He was prepared to release the poisonous gas at any time. With the poisonous gas, he didn't feel that there was a need to bring anything else. In any case, no matter what the other party did, after throwing 14 bottles of sarin gas, they should be able to continue their journey. It was just a pity that this thing wouldn't be easy to get his hands on in the future. Other than that, he also brought back that custom-made Han Chinese costume. He held it in his hand and smiled at the Empress. Only you can display that kind of charm in this costume. I have specially found someone to custom make it as a gift for your Majesty. What costume? The Empress glanced at him and was slightly puzzled. The costume was wrapped up and she couldn't tell what it looked like. Renbochin took out a photo. It was the effect of the costume when worn on a model. The costume was a 3-looped long robe with a beard. The extended lapel formed a triangle that wrapped around the front of the body and dragged all the way to the feet. The whole costume was red in color with black and gold at the edges. The front part of the costume was a golden phoenix spreading its wings and the back was decorated with golden flower petals. It looked extremely eye-catching, but it was also extremely beautiful. Renbochin imagined the effect of the Empress wearing it. Coupled with her cold temperament, she would definitely be able to amaze the world. If someone else were to wear it, they would probably look like a nouveau riche. At the end of the day, the costume still depended on the person wearing it. The same costume on Yuanlo would definitely have a different effect on other people. The Empress looked at the costume in the photo and revealed a look of fondness. No matter what kind of woman she was, she didn't have much resistance to beautiful clothes. She then asked Renbochin to keep the costume in his bag and try it on when he returned. Renbochin carried the things back to the crowd. Everyone was aware of his disappearance last night. After all, he was always with the Empress when they pitched camp at night. This morning, they didn't set off because they were waiting for him. Everyone didn't know where he went and felt that this person was even more mysterious. The river was called the White Dragon River. Legend has it that there used to be a white dragon stirring up trouble in the river. The Falling Moon Gorge was situated on both sides of the White Dragon River. It was about 300 meters high and below it was the surging White Dragon River. At this moment, on one side of the Falling Moon Gorge, tens of thousands of soldiers were scattered and resting. A dignified-looking old man stood on a rock and looked at the other side of the river. Yesterday afternoon, they arrived at the White Dragon River and pitched camp. This morning, they didn't set off at all. This made him a little puzzled as to what the other party was planning. Zhu Mu elders, I will have to trouble you this time. If it succeeds, I will ask for credit for you. After a while, the old man got down from the rock and said to the 2 skinny old men who were sitting cross-legged not far away. Upon closer inspection, the two of them looked exactly the same. The only difference was that one of them had a bamboo embroidered on his sleeve while the other had a tree embroidered on his sleeve. After hearing what he said, the Zhumu elders opened their eyes and nodded slightly. These two were very famous in Great Xia. Even though they weren't ranked in the top 10 experts, they were ranked 11th. Ever since they were born, they had always advanced and retreated together and had never been separated. When they fought with others, regardless of whether it was one person or many people, they would always attack together. Therefore, on the list, both of them were ranked 11th. In fact, the two of them were telepathic and had a set of joint attacks. When they worked together, their combat power increased greatly. Even Hongwu had to scratch his head when he encountered the two of them. It was just that their individual strength was slightly weaker than the top 10 experts, and that was why they were ranked 11th. However, after Hua Sanliu's death, the two of them were now ranked 10th in the world. This time, they paid a huge price and used something that the two of them urgently needed to invite the two of them over. At this moment, a messenger pigeon flew over. After receiving the messenger pigeon, a person hurriedly went forward and reported, "General, they have set off. They will arrive in 4 hours." Chapter 217. Renbaqian sat on Chishui's back as they walked upstream along the White Dragon River. As the terrain got higher and higher, the distance between the two banks became narrower and narrower. "In front of us is the Falling Moon Gorge," Ting Ji reminded. At this moment, the road that had been straight all along the river suddenly took a turn, increasing the distance between them by quite a bit. After walking for some distance, Renbaqian saw many flags fluttering in the distance. There were quite a few of them, and the words of this world were written on them. At the same time, he also saw what the so-called Falling Moon Gorge looked like. He saw that the Falling Moon Gorge extended forward on both sides, and below it was a mountain wall that extended backward, all the way to the bottom. Above them, the two protruding mountains almost merged together. The closest point was only 3 meters away, but it was also extremely narrow, only a meter wide. At the same time, there was a rope bridge connecting the two sides. Here, the winged cavalry's mounts could directly jump over, but only one at a time. It was the same for the rope bridge. After reaching the opposite side, they passed through a narrow path that was a few meters long and gradually expanded to both sides, forming a large piece of flat land. At this moment, the army of over 10,000 stood there densely, stretching all the way to the forest in the distance. Flags were fluttering in the air. The 10,000-strong army stood there in neat formation, and a murderous aura assaulted their senses. If they wanted to go over now, they could only jump over one by one and face the enemy's army head-on. Needless to say, as long as the other party fired a volley of arrows at one person, even an Earth Will expert would have to suffer. The main problem was that it was too narrow. Only one person could jump through at a time, and then they would be focused on. When Renbaqian saw this scene, he felt that it was spectacular. Soon after, he smacked his lips. The other party was simply breaking the rules. Without the poisonous gas, he really couldn't think of how to pass through. Even Ting Ji, Shenghu, Li Tanhua, and the others had solemn expressions on their faces as they carefully observed the opposite side with their binoculars. The Empress squinted her almond-shaped eyes and curled her lips. Even though Great Xia wouldn't suffer a huge loss if this group of people were to perish here, they would at least feel some heartache, right? After all, with such a neat formation and murderous aura, one could tell that they were elite soldiers who had been through hundreds of battles. Qi Zixiao. An old man in armor shouted as he galloped out from the opposite formation. "I am Jia Yugong, I have been waiting here for a long time." Shenghu immediately scolded, "Old thief, how can you call His Majesty's name directly? That's the Emperor of Dao, not the Emperor of Great Xia. Furthermore, whether or not I can return to Dao and continue to be the Empress still depends on whether or not my subordinates agree." Jia Yugong laughed heartily. 100 battles. 100 battles. The opposing army immediately drew out their long sabers, raised their arms, and shouted in unison. Their murderous intent soared, and their voices resounded through the clouds. If other people were to see this scene, their legs would probably go weak. The Empress snorted in disdain. As for the other winged cavalry warriors, they were all at the earth-will level, so they weren't easily intimidated. If they were forced to charge into the army formation with weapons and spears, they would also not care about it and charge forward while laughing. It was still unknown who would win and who would lose. However, it was true that they were guarding the other side, so it would not be easy to go over. Renbaqian looked at the other side and wondered if he would go to hell if he died. In the past, he didn't even dare to kill a chicken. Then, he ordered Xiong Pai to kill for the first time. Then, he personally killed for the first time. Then, he poisoned the 9 pavilions with sarin gas. He didn't know the details, but the second time, he poisoned thousands of people to death. This time, it was another 10,000 people. However, why did Great Xiao's news travel so slowly? Previously, 4,000 people died at the pass of Mount Liaoning, and these people didn't receive any news at all. To think that Renbaqian even thought that the other party would run away after hearing the news. In the end, there were so many of them standing together. After thinking for a long time, he finally sighed faintly and said, "Sigh, what a sin." This caused a few of the winged cavalry warriors to roll their eyes. The Empress, who was behind him, almost laughed out loud at his sigh. Just as Renbaqian was sighing, Yinyao suddenly flew over from the back of the opposing army. In fact, this Yinyao had arrived a few minutes ago, but the murderous aura from below caused it to circle a few times and not dare to come down. After everyone quietened down, the Yinyao circled around again before flying toward the Yinyao in the cage below. Someone plucked the note from his leg. After taking a glance at it, his expression changed drastically. He hurriedly ran to Jia Yugong's side and shouted, "Sir, sir." Jia Yugong stood there with his back ramrod straight, looking straight at the people opposite him with a rather heroic spirit. When he heard the voice behind him, he turned around and asked, "What's the matter?" "Sir, take a look," that person said with a deathly pale face. Jia Yugong looked at him suspiciously, took the note, and immediately, his expression changed drastically. "Be careful of the poison. 4,000 soldiers from the Yuqing barracks at Mount Liaoning have been poisoned to death." At first, he found it strange that these people didn't seem to have experienced any battles before arriving here. He never expected that the 4,000 soldiers lying in ambush at Mount Liaoning would be poisoned to death. This time, he couldn't remain calm and heroic anymore. If it was a real battle, he wouldn't have any complaints even if he died in battle. However, if they were poisoned to death like the Yuqing barracks, he couldn't accept it. Soon after, his mind was spinning rapidly. How did the other party do it? How could he guard against it? Did the other party still have that kind of poison? How should he handle the situation now? Should he fight or retreat? If he fought, what would he do if the other party poisoned them? Right now, he had no idea how the other party had managed to poison so many people to death in 2 open spaces. Would his 10,000 soldiers follow in their footsteps? They didn't even get close to the other party before they were completely wiped out. If he retreated, how would he explain it to the higher-ups? Moreover, if the other party didn't have any more poison, wouldn't he become a joke? Right now, he had the advantage of time and place. If he retreated just like this, he could kill himself if word got out. His spine felt like it was about to be broken. After thinking about it, he could only bet that the other party didn't have that kind of poison anymore. However, no matter how he thought about it, the possibility of that was very small. At this moment, an arrow pierced through the air and flew directly in their direction. In an instant, it shot into the army formation. "Not shooting myself." But the army formation. Jia Yugong was puzzled at first. Then, an idea flashed in his mind and he shouted, "The first 5 rows, spread out to the sides and get into formation at the back of the army." As soon as Jia Yugong shouted, the front line of the army formation became slightly chaotic. At this moment, another arrow was shot into the army. Jia Yugong was even more certain that the other party's arrow was poisoned. At the same time, he noticed that the arrow seemed to have something on it. At this moment, he was almost certain. 6 rows, 7 rows, spread out. Those who break the formation will be killed. Jia Yugong shouted again, and all the soldiers in the front line who were called out flowed around the army formation and got into formation at the back. After the Empress shot 2 arrows, she stopped just as she was about to shoot the 3rd arrow. Given the situation, even if she shot the remaining 12 bottles of poison, it wouldn't be very effective. This Jia Yugong was a little troublesome. Chapter 2:18. Upon hearing Jia Yugong shout, many of the winged cavalry warriors were furious. The Empress didn't say a word and shot an arrow. There wasn't a bottle of sarin gas tied to the arrow. In an instant, the arrow arrived in front of Jia Yugong's face. Jia Yugong suddenly placed his long saber horizontally in front of him. A loud clang resounded throughout the battlefield. Jia Yugong couldn't stand still and retreated 7 or 8 steps before he managed to stabilize himself. Looking at the center of his saber, there was a dent in the arrow and the arrow was smashed into pieces. He was overwhelmed with shock that an arrow was so powerful. However, it also made him feel that Qi Zixiao had no other way to deal with this situation. Immediately, he looked pleased. "Everyone, get ready," Jia Yugong ordered. The soldiers at the front immediately drew their arrows, lightly knocked them on their bowstrings, and lowered them slightly. As for the Zhu Mu elders, they were hiding nearby and waiting for Qi Zixiao to come over before making their move. "Your Majesty, they have retreated 30 meters. I would like to lead some men to kill our way over." Zheng Hu immediately cupped his fists in front of the Empress and requested. "I am willing to go with you," Ting Ji and Li Tianhua requested at the same time. At this moment, the other party had retreated 30 meters. Naturally, the shooting range had also retreated a little, allowing more than 100 men to go over. "There's no hurry." Ren Baqin jumped down from Qi Shui's back and said, "Your Majesty, you can be a thief for 1,000 days, but you can't guard against a thief for 1,000 days. Don't look at me. This is slang, do you understand slang?" Ren Baqin said to the 3 people who were glaring at him. "Even if they are on guard during the day, can they still be on guard at night? At that time, they won't be able to see anything clearly and won't know what will happen." "It's just a delay of half a day," Ren Baqin said to the 3 of them. In fact, it was much more convenient for the winged cavalry to act at night due to their low numbers and high strength. On the contrary, those elite Great Xia soldiers would probably be tired after standing here for an entire day. Furthermore, if they were to shoot the poison at that time, they probably wouldn't be able to detect it. "That's fine, we'll wait until night," the Empress said indifferently. If it wasn't for the fact that her strength had been greatly reduced, she would be able to kill her way over by herself. However, if we don't make any movements, I reckon they will figure it out in no time. At that time, they might come up with some ideas. I'm afraid it will be troublesome. "I have another idea that we could try," Ren Baqin suggested again. "Speak." The Empress looked at him expectantly. She wanted to see what ideas he had. Ren Baqin took the backpack off the drone again and said, "I will try to see if I can use this to throw the sarin over." The Empress tilted her head slightly and said, "Okay." The 3 of them were no longer clamoring about going over to chop people up. They wanted to see what he was going to do. The thing in his hands was more attractive to them than chopping people up. In fact, Ren Baqin had previously thought about the problem of the airdrop. He even went online to search for a remote control for making a timer. However, the remote control that was sold online had a very short range. Usually, it was only 100 meters. What he needed was a few kilometers. There were many other ways to modify it, but unfortunately, he didn't know how to do it. His hands-on ability had never been his forte, and he didn't know much about machinery. Later, he thought of a way to tie the sarin bottle to the drone with 2 ropes. One of the ropes was tied to the back half of the bottle and fixed to the drone. The other rope was threaded through the rubber stopper of the bottle. Then, he would use the crane platform of the drone to pull off the rubber stopper. Then, there would only be one rope fixed to the back of the bottle. The mouth of the bottle would naturally drop down and spill the sarin liquid. Not to mention that it wasn't easy to detect, it evaporated quickly, and it covered a larger area. The only drawback was that a lot of the sarin gas would evaporate when it was spilled, which was somewhat wasteful. However, with the lethality of the sarin gas, it should be sufficient. One had to know that after using the 2 bottles just now, there were still 12 bottles on hand, which was equivalent to 6 kilograms. In theory, 1 kilogram of sarin could kill millions of people. Renbochin greeted the few of them and distributed the antidote to them. This was because he was afraid that they would be poisoned to death if he didn't do it properly. Following which, he took a bottle and the drone to a faraway place to fiddle with them. After a full half an hour, Renbochin ran back to take the remote control. "Is it done?" The Empress turned her head and looked at him. Her clear and bright eyes contained an inquisitive look. "It should be fine. Let's try it." Renbochin grinned. At the front, Zhenghu and Tingji were holding binoculars and pretending to look at the situation. The other winged cavalry warriors also got down from their mounts and split out 100 people to follow behind them. They looked like they were ready to rush over at any time to attract the attention of the other party. Sure enough, the other party didn't relax. Just now, when Renbochin was fiddling with the drone, 2.5 rows of soldiers fell, giving Jia Yugong a fright. Later on, he was sure that it was the spread of the poison and that the other party didn't use any undetectable methods. This caused the other party to retreat another 20 meters. Furthermore, the other party caught a few small beasts and threw them to the front of the battle formation. If those small beasts died, the other party would retreat again. Qi Zhixiao, you are unworthy of being the 5th most powerful expert in the world. You are neither advancing nor retreating. What exactly is the meaning of this? Jia Yugong yelled from time to time to provoke the other party. If it was in the past, this group of winged cavalry warriors would have directly charged over. However, they didn't know what Renbochin was doing at the back. Jia Yugong's yells at most caused a little commotion before everything calmed down. Jia Yugong stretched out his hand to block the sunlight and looked at the other side. He muttered incessantly to himself as he didn't know what these people were doing. The Zhumu elders were hiding in their hiding place. After a while, they opened their eyes. After seeing that there wasn't any movement, they closed their eyes again and continued to rest. Even though more than 400 winged cavalry warriors weren't a match for the 2 of them, it would be a little tricky with the addition of Qi Zhixiao. As for how much strength Qi Zhixiao had left, the 2 of them weren't confident at all. It was better to wait for the other party to arrive before making a move. Just the fact that they had captured Qi Zhixiao made their withered hearts a little excited. Qi Zhixiao's status and strength were extremely tempting to anyone. Time passed slowly. A small dot first flew 800 meters into the sky. Following which, it began to move toward the top of the battle formation before descending another 200 meters. The Zhumu elders suddenly looked up at the sky at the same time. With their eyesight, they could only see a small dot in the sky. It was the thing that was making a buzzing sound. The 2 of them were somewhat puzzled as they didn't know what was above them. It sounded like an insect. At this moment, a few drops of water dripped in front of the 2 of them, causing them to frown slightly. Under the control of Rinpochen, the drone in the sky pulled off the rubber stopper of the bottle as the cloud platform rotated. The mouth of the bottle immediately dropped down, and the sarin liquid spilled out. However, it was blown away by the mountain wind and scattered in all directions. Rinpochen controlled the remote control. He didn't know if the drone was successful or not. After waiting for another 2 minutes, he controlled the drone to fly back. Before the drone could land on the ground, the battle formation on the other side suddenly became chaotic. In the battle formation, the heads of the winged cavalry warriors fell to the ground. Seeing this situation, the Empress immediately knew that Rinpochen had succeeded. Her aura suddenly changed, and her cold voice rang in everyone's ears. "Take the medicine and kill." The winged cavalry warriors had been waiting for a long time and didn't know how long they had to wait. Just when they were feeling anxious, they heard this voice and were immediately overjoyed. After taking the medicine, one by one, they ran to the edge of the battle formation, jumped up, and directly leaped toward the opposite side while shouting, "Kill!" At the same time, the Empress transformed into a red shadow and leaped over everyone's heads. She shot 2 arrows in the air toward the positions in the battle formation that weren't affected by the poisonous gas. At the same time, she pounced toward Jia Yugong. She didn't react just now, but that didn't mean that she would let him off. At this moment, Jia Yugong didn't have any heroic aura. When the battle formation started to become chaotic, he was already shocked. After hearing this shout, he immediately broke into a run and ran in the direction of the Zhu Mu elders. At this moment, the Zhu Mu elders were also shocked when they saw the battle formation become chaotic, but they forcibly suppressed the uneasiness in their hearts. Seeing the Empress transform into a red shadow and pounce toward Jia Yugong, the two of them waited for a moment until Jia Yugong ran close to them. When the Empress was only about 30 meters away from him, they let out a long laugh and appeared. The two of them were equally skinny and had the same appearance. Their laughter sounded like 2 pieces of wood rubbing against each other, and it was extremely unpleasant to hear. A brush as thick as an arm appeared in Elder Zhu's hand. He drew in the air, and a black word appeared in the air. "Lock!" Elder Zhu shouted softly, and his eyes shone brightly. Following Rinpochian's shout, a huge chain appeared beneath the Empress's feet and wrapped around her. This was his godly martial arts. Elder Mu leaped directly above the Empress, crossed his arms, and shouted, "Suppress!" A huge paperweight that was about 20 meters tall and more than 20 meters in diameter appeared in front of him. It was like a mountain and smashed toward the Empress below. "Your Majesty!" The winged cavalry warriors behind her were all red with anger. "Zi Xiao!" Rinpochen, who was watching this scene with binoculars from afar, suddenly cried out involuntarily. This was the first time he had seen a battle between spirit will experts. From such a distance, the thing that appeared out of thin air looked like a small mountain. If it were to hit the Empress, he didn't dare to think about the consequences. The Empress raised her head and looked at the paperweight that was smashing down with great force. Her eyes began to turn red, and every tiny part of her body felt like it was being torn apart. At this moment, all she could see was the paperweight that was getting bigger and bigger, as well as the evil spirit pattern below it. Jia Yugong turned his head and saw this scene. He immediately stopped in his tracks and sneered. "Qi Zi Xiao. Ha!" Jia Yugong calmed down and was about to shout something when he saw Elder Mu holding his throat and suddenly falling to the ground. The paperweight in the air also turned into countless pieces and dissipated. Elder Zhu's body swayed and fell to the ground as well. The black chain and bamboo brush disappeared at the same time. Before Qi Zixiao could finish shouting, this sudden change almost made him choke to death. In front of everyone, he shouted, "Ha!" Chapter 219. Through the binoculars, Rinpochen saw the Empress using the ghostly steps to appear in front of Jia Yugong. Following which, she executed the dragon and tiger dance. Her movements were so skillful and smooth that it made him gasp in amazement. Jia Yugong couldn't block it at all. He was thrown into the sky like a broken sack, and his body was no longer recognizable as human. Your Majesty! Ting Ji and the others chased after him. Just now, they had almost been scared to death. Kill, the Empress said coldly. The great Xia army at the front was in chaos. The sarin gas released by the drones had killed at least 2,000 people. The Empress shot another 2 arrows, and this time, she directly shot at the area with the most people. Under the circumstances that the surrounding people couldn't dodge in time, another batch of people fell, causing the situation of the great Xia army to become even more chaotic. Some people wanted to escape, some wanted to intercept, some wanted to stop the enemy, and some wanted to rescue Jia Yugong. Everything happened too abruptly. Both Jia Yugong and the rest of the great Xia soldiers didn't expect things to turn out this way. Starting from those who were closest to the fallen soldiers, it spread to the periphery. With Jia Yugong's death, the chaos became even more difficult to resolve. After all, they were experienced soldiers. If they were given more time, they would probably be able to reorganize their formation. However, 400 winged cavalry warriors with the strength of earth will rushed into the crowd like tigers entering a flock of sheep, setting off a rain of blood. This time, the great Xia army completely collapsed. Renbaqian looked at the scene through his binoculars from afar. It could be said that human heads and severed limbs were flying everywhere, which made him sigh. However, after experiencing so much, he had started to get used to it. This was the disregard for human life that he had developed after witnessing so many massacres. The Empress walked to Elder Mu's side. She recognized these 2 people as soon as they appeared. After all, their appearances and weapons were very special. As expected of a top-notch spirit will expert. Elder Mu was poisoned and fell from such a high place, yet he was still alive. His entire body was covered in injuries, and his face had turned purple. One of his hands was tightly clutching his throat, and his pupils were almost the size of a rice grain. He had almost lost his mind, but he still had some instincts. The sarin gas had shrunk his windpipe, making it difficult for him to breathe. The strength of the 2 made them realize it later, and they also breathed in more poisonous gas. Their strong physiques also made them suffer more. If the 2 of them were given the antidote now, they might be able to survive. If it was someone else, he might have made the same choice and subdued 2 powerful fighters. However, the Empress merely stepped on his head coldly. It was like a watermelon being smashed. He then landed on Elder Zhu's body and stomped on his chest and back, causing his internal organs to spurt out of his mouth. The Empress appeared beside Qi Shui in a few flashes. Renbaqian handed her a handkerchief and said, "It got on your face." Perhaps it was Jia Yugong's blood. 2 drops of blood splashed onto the fair skin of the Empress, making her look even more flirtatious. The Empress took it and wiped her face. However, not only her face, but her body and feet were also stained with blood. Especially her skirt, which carried the smell of blood. Clothes. The Empress's expression became much gentler after returning. Renbaqian took out the custom-made Han costume, and the Empress jumped down from the cliff. Below the cliff, which was about 300 meters high, was the surging river. Of course, the Empress wouldn't commit suicide. With her skills, she would probably be fine even if she jumped down. Renbaqian's gaze wandered as he wondered if he would be slapped to death if he were to climb up the cliff and look down with his binoculars. He sighed faintly as he looked at the 2 winged cavalry warriors who had stayed here to protect him. They were looking at him with piercing eyes. "You guys are really a hindrance." Speaking of which, he really wanted to take a peek at the Empress's identity. Even if he could take a peek openly in a few years' time, he still wanted this kind of stimulation. Under such stimulation, he didn't even care about the massacre in front of him. His mind was filled with mosaic images. A moment later, the Empress leaped up from the cliff. She was a gorgeous lady wearing a crimson robe with a golden phoenix spreading its wings and appeared in front of Renbachin. Just as Renbachin had expected, after the Empress changed into this gorgeous robe, no one could take their eyes off her. Her hair was a little wet, and it looked like she had just washed it. What made Renbachin even more concerned was that the Empress was barefooted. After tapping on a rock, she flew onto Qi Shui's back. At that moment, Renbachin seemed to have seen a jade-like foot. He subconsciously turned his head to look at the Empress's foot, but it was blocked by her skirt. "What are you looking at?" The Empress raised her eyebrows and asked in an unfriendly tone. "Nothing." Renbachin hurriedly shook his head. However, his expression was very regretful. Anyone who saw him would want to give him a kick. The next moment, that foot landed on his face and kicked him off Qi Shui's back. Renbachin cried out in pain and fell to the ground. His limbs were spread out, and he was not in a hurry to get up. His gaze wandered around a few times, but he didn't see anything that he wanted to see. At this moment, he began to feel that Qi Shui was really too much of a hindrance. He had completely forgotten how much he liked Qi Shui in the past. It was a classic example of calling people Xiao Tian in front of flowers and under the moonlight. In fact, when the Empress was on Earth, it wasn't that he didn't see her feet. In this world, there were many hot women who wore animal skin skirts. Naturally, there wasn't such a custom as to be afraid of being seen. Aboriginal women actually didn't have any defenses against this. However, the battle cries were still coming from afar. The battlefield was right in front of him. Looking at the Empress's gorgeous attire, he felt especially itchy in his heart. After a while, Renbachin heard that the battle cries seemed to have become much softer. He got up from the ground, took a pair of binoculars, and looked at the opposite side of the cliff. He saw corpses lying on the ground and blood splattered everywhere. The great Xia army had already been completely routed and fled into the forest in the distance. The winged cavalry were in hot pursuit from behind. After waiting for a while, those winged cavalry warriors finally returned with a satisfied look on their faces. Their simple smiles were restored. After doing a head count, it was discovered that 4 winged cavalry warriors had died in battle. All of them were Great Xia's Earth Will experts who were seriously injured and died when they fought with their lives on the line. Seeing that there were casualties, Renbachin felt that it was a pity. After all, these people dying on the battlefield couldn't escape from him. Renbachin thought about the Bichi again. Nowadays, he was really a jinx. However, Great Xia was even more unlucky. As the saying goes, misfortune and blessing are interdependent. Where was the blessing? This time around, there were many Earth Will experts in the Great Xia army. It was just that a large number of people died from the poison gas at the beginning and became chaotic. Subsequently, they were defeated by the charging winged cavalry, which prevented them from displaying their strength. Otherwise, with the cooperation of 10,000 elite soldiers, the winged cavalry would have suffered heavy casualties in a head-on battle. As for the Zhu Mu elders, they had just been promoted to the top 10 experts. Just by showing their faces, they gave everyone a fright, and they were poisoned just like that. In this battle, 3,000 Great Xia soldiers were poisoned to death. In the ensuing chaos, 4,000 were killed by the winged cavalry, and less than 3,000 were able to escape. Including the previous 2 battles, Great Xia suffered 13,000 casualties. It could be said that they had suffered heavy casualties, while the winged cavalry only lost 6 men. This didn't include the 9 pavilions and the Zhu Mu elders. No one knew that there was still the Qingyang sect that was quietly declining. As for Qi Zixiao, not even a single hair on her body was hurt. When this news spread, the entire Great Xia was in an uproar. The Emperor of Great Xia flipped the table in his study. When Lian Qiji from the Lian family found out about this, his face turned pale. Previously, he only wanted Qi Zixiao to see that gigolo die, but he was powerless to do anything. This was the greatest revenge he could do. He really didn't expect Qi Zixiao to be willing to go deep into Great Xiao for that gigolo. When the news of the 9 pavilions being destroyed came out, he locked himself in his study for a day and didn't come out. Soon after, he sent out all the insiders except for one earth will expert. Then, he sent people to silence them halfway. He realized that he had underestimated Qi Zixiao. He had underestimated her strength and temperament. He couldn't imagine what she would do if she knew that he was involved in this matter. When the results of the 3 consecutive battles came out, he was pondering how to silence that earth will expert. Losing an earth will expert could be said to be a serious blow to the Lian family. Not to mention, the Lian family now only had a total of 4 earth will experts after losing 2 people. He was really afraid that the slightest bit of news would spread. Chapter 220. Qi Shui walked over the corpses that were strewn all over the place. There was a thick smell of blood everywhere. There were corpses everywhere. Some of them were poisoned to death, while others were hacked to death. There was almost no complete body, and blood was everywhere. In the past, when he watched blood movies, he always felt that there was too much ketchup. Now, he suddenly felt that it wasn't good to be too realistic. Looking at those halved corpses, broken limbs everywhere, and the ground full of internal organs and flesh, if it was in the past, he would have vomited yesterday night's dinner. Renbaqian also saw an interesting thing in the pile of corpses. It was a box with many small holes on it. It wasn't just 1 or 2. That was the central position of the Great Xia army. All the soldiers were poisoned to death. There were many such boxes on the ground, but most of them were trampled on, revealing the crossbow bolts inside. Only a few were still intact. He jumped down and picked one up. Tingji saw it from a distance and said, "It's a Great Xia crossbow. There should be a crossbow battalion here." Renbaqian aimed the box at an empty space not far away and found something that looked like a wrench. He pressed it and felt a jolt in his hand. In a split second, 12 crossbow bolts were shot out and nailed into the ground. "This thing is pretty powerful." Renbaqian was a little speechless. Even though it wasn't as good as modern firearms, which required half a day to load a crossbow bolt and had a shorter range, it was still pretty powerful. Previously, this crossbow battalion should have been protecting the central position of the Great Xia army. The opponent's plan was to use the bowmen in the first few rows to reduce the number of winged cavalry warriors. After that, the bowmen would withdraw from the sides and reveal the crossbow battalion. This was the perfect time to deal a painful blow to the winged cavalry. It was a pity that neither the bowmen nor the crossbow battalion were put to use, especially the crossbow battalion. They didn't even have the chance to display their strength and were immediately poisoned to death. This could only be considered as Great Xia's bad luck. Renbaqian originally wanted to pick up a few crossbows, but after thinking that they were covered in sarin gas, he gave up. After walking for a long distance, there were only scattered corpses in the surroundings. Only then did the smell of blood in the surroundings disperse. Sigh, such is life. Renbaqian looked at the sky at a 45-degree angle and sighed. He was really a little uncomfortable. Even though there were quite a number of corpses in the past, firstly, there weren't as many as this time. Secondly, he didn't walk on a pile of corpses. The feeling of walking on a pile of corpses from AF was definitely different. Especially of such a miserable scene. Fortunately, he only sighed and pretended to be sentimental. Then, he threw this matter to the back of his mind. Such things happened everywhere, and he couldn't care less about it. Unless the world was unified and could maintain a few hundred years of peace, it would be the same on every battlefield. After advancing another few hundred meters, the winged cavalry at the front suddenly rushed forward. "Your Majesty!" Ting Ji remained at his original position and cupped his hands at the Empress. "What is it?" the Empress asked. "There are many corpses up ahead. Judging from the direction and the way they're dressed, they're probably from the Protectorate of the North." The Empress's face immediately turned gloomy. When the winged cavalry in front of them gradually stopped and split into two sides, Renbaqian and the Empress finally saw the scene in front of them. Corpses, weapons, and arrows were strewn all over the place. In the middle stood a headless man, but he held a saber with both hands and stood firmly on the ground. There were wounds all over his body, and his flesh was split open on both sides. Just by looking at this scene, one could feel a solemn and tragic aura. The Empress got down from Qi Shui and slowly walked over. Renbaqian quickly jumped down and followed behind her. The battlefield just now made him feel that it was a massacre, but this place made him feel sad. There weren't only corpses of Aboriginal soldiers, but also corpses of Great Xia soldiers. All the Aboriginal soldiers were like sieves with short arrows pierced through their bodies. They weren't shot by bows, but by crossbows. They were the kind of repeating crossbows that were picked up from the battlefield just now. It could be imagined that these soldiers rushed over from the Protectorate of the North to welcome the Empress. Together with the winged cavalry, they launched a pincer attack on the Great Xia army, but they were ambushed by Great Xia. Both sides engaged in a chaotic battle here, and eventually, the Aboriginal army was completely annihilated. Furthermore, this happened 2 days ago. Because Renbaqian's journey back to Earth was delayed by 2 days, the Great Xia army calmly intercepted the Empress and her party after they reorganized themselves. The result was too tragic to look at. According to Renbaqian's imagination, this was a place where Great Xia would first attack with crossbows from both sides. Then, the soldiers would charge forward and use crossbows to kill the surviving Aboriginal soldiers and Great Xia soldiers. Even so, the number of Aboriginal soldiers at the scene was much fewer than the Great Xia soldiers. At first glance, the ratio was about 1 to 2 to 2.5. Approximately 1,000 Aboriginal soldiers and 2,000 Great Xia soldiers were buried here. As for the burly man who was standing, in addition to the wounds from the swords and arrows, there were also purplish-black marks on his body as if he was tied up by something. Renbaqian immediately recalled the chain that appeared out of thin air and bound the Empress with his binoculars. Looking at all this, the Empress's ice-cold aura became even more intense. It made people around her feel as if the surrounding temperature had dropped, and they trembled all over. This was emitted from her murderous aura. "Your Majesty, it's Lin Yaoqi." Li Tanhua still had a poker face. He held a bloody head that was glaring angrily and came forward. Lin Yaoqi was considered a valiant general in the Protectorate of the North, but he didn't expect to die here. The only consolation was that the Zhumu elders only lived 2 days longer than him. "Your Majesty, there are corpses in the forest as well." At this moment, the winged cavalry warriors who ran into the forest to check on the two sides ran out to report. Renbaqian followed the Empress into the forest and indeed, there were some corpses lying on the ground. However, there weren't many of them. There were only a few scattered corpses of Great Xia and Aboriginal soldiers. However, the Aboriginal soldiers who were able to rush into this place were slightly stronger. The Protectorate of the North wasn't the winged cavalry. Ordinary soldiers had just attained the strength of a man-will expert, and an earth-will expert could already serve as a low-level commander. Those who could withstand crossbows and enter the forest were at least at the advanced level of the man-will level. "Bring all of them back." The Empress paused for a moment, turned around, and returned to the back of Qishui. Renbaqian stood there and watched as everyone took off the heads and hung them on both sides of their mounts. He sighed and returned to the back of Qishui. He didn't know if the families of these 1,000 people would hate him. Even though the Aboriginals didn't view death as a big deal, this battlefield still affected the mood of the troops. For the rest of the journey, everyone was much less talkative. When the sky turned dark, everyone walked out of this mountain range and saw a plain in front of them. Everyone rested for 2 hours before setting off again. As expected, there weren't any obstructions in front of them. By late at night, they had already crossed the border of Great Xia and returned to the territory of Dayo. Not long after entering Dayo, they encountered a group of mounted scouts holding torches. After asking loudly and confirming that it was the winged cavalry, they immediately asked in delight, "May I know if Her Majesty is inside?" After receiving a confirmation, they immediately sent someone back to report and brought a group of people to see the Empress. When they got closer, they realized that this mounted scout had some injuries on his body and his arm was bandaged. Not only was he injured, but a few people behind him were also injured. What happened? "Where's General Hongwu?" the Empress inquired. "Your Majesty, a few days ago, Tiesua Pass sent troops to attack Ping City and only retreated today. General Hongwu is overseeing Ping City," the soldier replied. From time to time, he would glance at Rinpochen, who was riding with the Empress. Apart from the depths of the 60,000 mountains, the news of the Empress choosing a husband was almost everywhere in Dayo. When he saw Rinpochen, he could guess who he was. Originally, he wanted to see if there was anything strange about him, but he was disappointed when he saw him. Chapter 221. Ping City was located in the northernmost part of Dayo and was only half a day away from Great Xia's Tiesua Pass. This small city with a population of less than 50,000 was like the tip of a knife pointing at Great Xia for decades, preventing them from advancing. The walls of Ping City were 15 meters tall and covered with all kinds of burn marks and repair marks. Many bloodstains had already seeped into the walls. At this time, Ping City was more dilapidated than usual. There were many scattered gravel outside the city, which was left by Great Xia's catapults. Logically speaking, the soldiers and civilians of Ping City should be able to take a good rest after the Great Xia army retreated. However, torches were lit both on and outside the city. Hongwu led a group of generals outside the city to welcome them. After waiting for a short while, they heard the sound of hooves coming from the darkness. Everyone was delighted. A moment later, silhouettes began to appear in the darkness and became clearer. Hongwu immediately saw the heads hanging on the winged cavalry. The aboriginals didn't have the habit of cutting off their enemies' heads as trophies of war. They always carried the heads of their comrades back to the 60,000 mountains. When he saw the glaring head hanging beside Li Tanhua's mount, Hongwu's expression remained unchanged, but he sighed in his heart. Lin Yaoqi was very talented, and Hongwu thought highly of him. There was a high chance that Lin Yaoqi would reach Hongwu's level in the future. When he saw Qi Shui, Hongwu shouted, "I welcome your majesty." At the same time, he stared daggers at Rinpochen, who was on Qi Shui's back. After all, this incident was because of him. Even though the Empress had returned and destroyed the 9 pavilions to become the 5th most powerful expert in the world, he hoped that such a thing would never happen. Not to mention that Rinpochen was riding the same mount as the Empress. He actually dared to do so, and Her Majesty actually allowed it. Not only him, but the other generals were also astonished. Rinpochen felt that everyone was looking at him and felt a little awkward. It was fine when they were outside, but now that he was riding the same mount as the Empress under the watchful eyes of the generals, it seemed a little inappropriate. Furthermore, after this incident, these people definitely wouldn't like him. It was better for him to obediently jump down. However, just as he was about to jump down from Qi Shui's back, he felt his waist go numb and couldn't move half of his body. Then, a hand grabbed onto his clothes and firmly held him in place. "Let's talk inside the city," the Empress said to everyone. "Yes." Everyone immediately responded. Under the watchful eyes of everyone, Rinpochen and the Empress rode into the city together. However, Hongwu and a few others noticed the Empress's petty actions and secretly shook their heads. When they entered the city, everyone's attention was on the winged cavalry that accompanied them. At a glance, everyone realized that there was something wrong with the number of winged cavalry. It wasn't that there were too few of them, but that there were too many of them. At present, 7 out of the 10 winged cavalry teams had returned. This meant that the Empress had at most 3 winged cavalry teams, which amounted to more than 400 people. According to what they knew, this group of people had been intercepted at least 3 times. The first time was near Mtuyang, and the second time was at the entrance of Mtilianin. More than 6,000 Great Xia soldiers died in battle. They had already obtained this information from Great Xia, but when they looked over, they actually didn't see any decrease in the winged cavalry. There was also the interception at the Falling Moon Gorge. Even though everyone didn't know the specifics, they could more or less make some guesses. As such, Hongwu arranged for Lin Yaoqi to lead 1,000 soldiers to fetch the Empress. But now, the heads of those 1,000 people had been brought back. Everyone could see the heads hanging on both sides of the winged cavalry's mounts and also Lin Yaoqi's head. Logically speaking, the situation of the battle should have been very tragic, but the winged cavalry didn't suffer any casualties. This made everyone extremely flabbergasted. On the way back to the city, everyone did a careful count. A total of 6 people were missing, and there were exactly 6 empty mounts. Everyone had question marks in their hearts as they didn't know what exactly happened. Were the winged cavalry really that powerful? Out of the 7 other teams, only 4 didn't encounter any interception. The other 3 teams also suffered quite a lot of casualties. One of the teams only had half of its people return, and the rest were all wounded. After entering the general's residence in the middle of Ping City, Renbaqian was arranged to rest while the Empress and the general sat together. Originally, I was going to personally welcome your majesty, but a few days ago, Great Xia started to attack Ping City. I had no choice but to stay here and send Captain Lin Yaoqi to welcome your majesty. Please forgive me, your majesty, Hongwu said. It doesn't matter. The Empress waved her hand. Your majesty. Hongwu first apologized, then couldn't help but say. We were really too rash this time. The Empress coldly waved her hand and said, you don't have to say any more, I know what I'm doing. She had a strong aura, but one of her hands was pinching her fingers in her sleeves. How could she not know that she was rash this time? She just didn't want to hear it from others. Furthermore, she had just chosen him as her husband, and he was already poisoned to death. Furthermore, he was poisoned to death. How could she put her face? Furthermore, she didn't want to see Renbaqian die. After all, in so many years, this was the first time someone had moved her heart. It was the first time she felt her heart palpitate with excitement. It was just that she couldn't tell outsiders about these things and her maiden feelings. Hongwu looked at the Empress for a long time and could only sigh in his heart. Her Majesty had changed. In the end, he had no choice but to ask, Your Majesty, did your journey go smoothly? The Empress tilted her head and thought for a while before replying, it could be considered smooth. Is there any army intercepting at the Falling Moon Gorge? The Empress sneered, there's someone called Jia Yugong and the Zhu Mu elders. The 2 of them have been waiting for decades and were lucky enough to enter the top 10 in the world. They actually dared to plot against me. Hongwu was slightly taken aback. The Zhu Mu elders were indeed troublesome to deal with. They were actually invited by Great Xia. After news of the Empress beating up Hua Sanlu in the 9 pavilions came back, he knew that Her Majesty definitely used a secret technique to stimulate her bloodline. She definitely hadn't recovered yet. Looking at her aura just now, she indeed hadn't recovered. She wasn't even at 50% of her peak condition. If she encountered the Zhu Mu elders, it would be difficult for her to escape. However, at this moment, the Empress was sitting here safe and sound. Immediately, he asked, how are the 2 of them now? Of course, I sent them to look for Hua Sanlu. The Empress snorted. Everyone in the hall was shocked. On this trip, not only did the Empress kill Hua Sanlu, but she also killed the Zhu Mu elders who had just entered the top 10. Even Hongwu found it difficult to deal with the two of them when they joined forces. If Rinpochen was here, he would definitely jump out and say, "Your Majesty is well versed in both literature and martial arts. Dongfang Bubi is the only one who reigns supreme." However, this group of people actually only cared about exclaiming in admiration and didn't have anyone to flatter her. Therefore, the Empress always felt that Dongfang Bubi was more likable. Hongwu was also surprised. However, it wasn't good to ask about this matter. It was better to ask the winged cavalry later. "Your Majesty is mighty," Hongwu finally said. Following which, everyone in the hall cheered, "Your Majesty is mighty." Lin Yaoqi's troops were completely wiped out. What happened? Hongwu asked again. Not only did he want to know about this matter, but the others also wanted to know about it. "You can ask the winged cavalry later." The Empress shook her head slightly. Lin Yaoqi's troops were ambushed and completely wiped out on the way. She wasn't willing to talk about this matter. After a few more words, the Empress said, "I'm tired. All of you can leave first. We will discuss this matter tomorrow." After everyone left, only Hongwu was left standing at the same spot. "Great General, is there anything else?" When the Empress was alone with Hongwu, her attitude was much friendlier. "I would like to ask if the rumor that Your Majesty poisoned everyone from the 9 pavilions and the 4,000 people at Mount Lianin is true." The Empress nodded. "Was it Deputy Prefect Ren's doing?" Hongwu could be said to be one of the people who understood the Empress the most. Perhaps there were some things that he wasn't clear about, but he was certain that the Empress didn't know how to use poison. The Empress thought for a while. It should be his doing, so she continued to nod her head. "Your Majesty, this person's methods are really dangerous. Furthermore, as far as I know, he has seen the Bichi before." "I'm afraid it's not appropriate for him to stay by your side," Hongwu said. Even though Rinpochen looked weak and couldn't even defeat a child, it was indeed terrifying to poison thousands of people to death. Furthermore, he was by the Empress's side. However, looking at Her Majesty's previous attitude, he could only persuade her in a roundabout way and hope that she would reconsider. "This is my personal matter. I already know about the Bichi incident. There's no need to mention this matter again." The Empress's face turned serious. Seeing this, Hongwu knew that he couldn't persuade Her Majesty anymore. He could only helplessly say, "In that case, I will send Your Majesty to rest." The Empress nodded her head slightly. Seeing the Empress walk into the room, Hongwu withdrew his gaze and sighed after a long time. At this moment, his mood was even more complicated than watching his daughter grow up to be played with by a pig. At first, he didn't take that person seriously. But now, he felt that he wasn't as simple as he thought. Chapter 222. In the morning, Hongwu and the generals from the Protectorate of the North learned about what happened along the way from the winged cavalry. Everyone was amazed by that unknown poison. If they had this thing, they could just throw it at the imperial capital of the Great Xia dynasty when the war started. Then, they heard the winged cavalry warriors talk about the walkie-talkies, binoculars, night vision goggles, and the device that could fly into the sky and take pictures of the enemy's setup as if it was witnessing everything with its own eyes. 3 of the 6 binoculars in the hands of the winged cavalry warriors were immediately snatched away. A group of people stood on the rooftop and used the binoculars to take a look. Then, they nodded their heads solemnly and switched to the next one. When it was the third person's turn to hold the binoculars, he refused to budge no matter what. The people next to him tried to stretch their hands out a few times, but they were all beaten down by him. He was still laughing there, making the people next to him have goosebumps. "Let me see." The person next to him was so angry that he snatched the binoculars and kicked him off the roof. Then, he put his eyes on the binoculars and was shocked at first. It was so clear. Something that was originally very far away was actually so close. Whose family was this little girl? He was actually taking a shower in the courtyard. So white. The general smacked his lips. What young lady? Let me see, let me see. The surrounding people immediately scrambled. Hongwu held his binoculars and looked into the distance. He had a pensive look on his face. These things were quite useful, and it seemed that they were all taken out by that brat. It seemed that he would have to ask him for some. She didn't consider whether Renbochin would give it to her. After all, the winged cavalry had quite a few of them. As for whether he liked Renbochin or not, it was even less important. He had to take what he had to take, especially when it was something that had various uses for the military. The two armies were separated by thousands of zhang. If they could see each other's flag signals, they would be able to respond in time. Also, what was the name of that thing that could communicate freely within thousands of zhang? Bring me that walkie-talkie, Hongwu instructed the person beside him after thinking for a while. On the morning of the next day, the Empress was still resting in her room. She was a little tired from the battles that happened a few days ago and the constant running. Now that she was back in a safe place, she did not want to move after waking up. She lay on the bed and stared blankly at the ceiling. When was the last time he lazed in bed like this? It had been a long time, so long that she couldn't remember. Ever since he moved into that empty palace, he had never been here. Even if she didn't attend morning court, every time she woke up and saw the cold and empty surroundings, she didn't want to continue lying down. Your Majesty. It's time for lunch. Renbochin's voice came from outside the door. The Empress shifted her gaze and ignored him. However, after Renbochin persevered and knocked on the door for a long time, a pillow directly smashed through the door and sent him tumbling. When Tingji, who was far away, saw this, he immediately shrunk his neck. Fortunately, he did not go and call for help. When the guards of the general's residence saw this scene, they subconsciously shifted their gazes away. After a short while, they shifted their gazes back to Renbochin. He had been lying there all this while, and no one knew if he had been knocked unconscious. Renbochin opened his eyes and looked up at the sky. Even though he was hit by the pillow, it was made of wood. Although it seemed like the force of the impact wasn't weak, it actually didn't hurt when it hit his body. He looked at the blue sky and white clouds above him. He smelled the Empress's fragrance on his pillow and was in no hurry to get up. It smelled good. It smelled like some kind of flower. Renbochin placed the pillow on his face and deeply smelled it. It was indeed very fragrant. Oh! Renbochin felt as if someone stepped on his stomach and immediately cried out in pain. Then, the pillow disappeared, leaving behind only a gust of fragrance. The wooden basin filled with water that Renbochin placed at the door just now also disappeared along with it. Bang! The door was slammed shut as well. The surrounding guards couldn't stop snickering. Such is life. Renbochin sighed. He suddenly recalled the time when he had just graduated from high school. Every night, he would play games and sleep like a log during the day. At that time, he had a dog at home called Xiaoxi. It was a shetty. Every day, not long after he fell asleep, it would jump on his stomach or step on his face to wake him up and bring him out for a walk. Unfortunately, that dog only stayed at home. Just like him, it would run back home within 2 seconds after he let go of the leash. That kick just now reminded him of the feeling when Xiaoxi jumped on his stomach. He got up from the ground and patted his clothes. The ground here was paved with stone slabs. The air in this world was good and it wasn't dirty at all. He patted his clothes subconsciously. When he was done patting, the Empress walked out of the room. She was still wearing that gorgeous red traditional Chinese dress. Her hair was tied up simply, which was more suitable for this dress than letting her hair down. Her pair of phoenix eyes were filled with killing intent as she glared at Rinpoche. "Your Majesty, it's time for lunch," Rinpoche said as he stood at the side. Lunch was specially prepared by Rinpoche. These days, as long as he didn't return to Earth, he would settle the Empress's meals. Seeing that the Empress hadn't woken up in the morning, he asked the guards for directions to the kitchen and cooked a few dishes. Speaking of which, the food in the general's residence was really terrible. When he ate the meal in the morning, he almost thought that it was for the odd job workers. After asking, he found out that Hongwu also ate such food. He ate whatever the food in the barracks was like. Should he say that Hongwu wasn't picky or that he was strict with himself? Rinpoche always felt that as a person, regardless of whether it was a man or a woman, he should treat himself better. For example, there was no need to make things difficult for himself. 1 plate of stir-fried wild vegetables, 2 plates of meat dishes, and a bowl of mutton soup. The Empress sat at the table and looked at the food in front of her. She said faintly, "Take a seat too." When they were on Earth, the two of them didn't need to pay so much attention to each other. However, over here, Rinpoche still had to be more or less mindful. When in Rome, do as the Romans do. The Empress did so on Earth, and he did the same here. After lunch, the Empress met Hongwu again in the afternoon. She asked him about the problems at the border and the recent situation in Great Xia. This time, she didn't avoid Rinpoche, but he wasn't too interested. He stood there with lifeless eyes. No one knew what he was thinking about, but it definitely had nothing to do with the things they were talking about. Deputy Prefect Ren. Hongwu's voice woke Rinpoche up. "Great General," Rinpoche hurriedly asked. "Those binoculars and walkie-talkies are very useful for the border. Do you still have them?" Hongwu asked in a deep voice. His gaze was fixed on Rinpoche's face. His face didn't show much expression, but Hongwu's imposing manner from his many years on the battlefield made Rinpoche a little uncomfortable. "The binoculars will take a few more days. After the glass factory is built, we can start producing them. I will think of a way to get the walkie-talkies." Rinpoche nodded. If they could be produced in this world, then there wouldn't be a need to bring them over from Earth. Rinpoche wanted to bring a lot of things, but unfortunately, he could only bring a few things. However, he definitely had to bring the walkie-talkies and solar chargers. "Also, can I take a look at the one that can fly in the sky?" Hongwu asked again. "Sure." Rinpoche looked at the Empress and nodded. After a while, a courtyard was surrounded by people. The imperial bodyguards were pushed outside, and no one knew what was going on inside. Rinpoche was surrounded by a group of people. He adjusted the drone and began to climb into the sky following his operation. The surrounding people immediately exclaimed in surprise. "This thing actually flew." Rinpoche controlled the drone and circled around the city. Within 1.7 kilometers, it was able to send pictures back via the ground station. The delay wasn't too big either. Everyone squeezed behind Rinpoche and looked at the pictures displayed on the screen in amazement. It was as if they had seen it with their own eyes. Pfft. Not long after, someone started to chuckle softly. Through a window, a man and a woman were doing something that was related to the survival of the Aboriginals. Many people made up their minds to close the windows, and close the windows. Chapter 223. After staying in Ping City for a day and 2 nights, everyone prepared to set off the next morning. Yesterday, he left the solar-powered charger, the remaining 3 binoculars, and a few walkie-talkies to the Protectorate of the North, as well as a drone. On the way out of the city, Renbochin turned around and waved at a bearded man with a swollen face among the generals who had come out to send them off with a hearty smile on his face. That bearded man actually wanted to use a beautiful maid to exchange for a drone. He was truly a genius. Furthermore, he even dared to ask Renbochin in private. Renbochin really admired his audacity. Yes, not only did the bearded man think about it, he actually said it out loud. It could be seen that he was truly a sentimental person. There was a reason why there were so few aboriginals. The result was predictable. No one knew when the Empress had appeared. That big beard was embedded into the wall, and it was impossible to dig it out. However, everyone's attitude toward Renbochin was much warmer last night. After all, the good stuff that Renbochin took out really made them envious. Once again, the number of winged cavalry warriors in the group had increased to more than 1,300. Among them, one group was intercepted by the Great Xia army, and more than half of them were killed or injured. The other two groups also suffered some casualties. It was unknown where Hongwu found a carriage. It wasn't considered luxurious, and it followed behind the Empress unhurriedly. At night, the Empress could also rest in it. During the day, the carriage was too bumpy. It was even more uncomfortable than riding on Chishui's back. For the next few days, they traveled during the day and found a town to rest at night. Everyone was now completely relaxed. Renbochin had nothing to do, so he continued to tell the Empress about the investiture of the gods. After a few days, he finished telling her about the journey to the west. When he talked about creating havoc in the heavenly palace, the Empress looked at him from the corner of her eyes and asked calmly, "Do you want to learn from that monkey? Actually, horse protector is a good job. You don't have to work, and you still get a salary. The 5 insurances and 1 housing fund are not bad at all. Isn't it a good thing to have time to bask in the sun?" Renbochin forcefully ridiculed the monkey and concluded, "Monkeys are wild and hard to tame. I'm different from him. 5 social insurance and 1 housing fund are enough. It would be best if I could just get paid and not work. Since you feel that the horse protector one is good, you will be in charge of Chishui from now on," the Empress casually said. "That's great." Renbochin was still very interested in Chishui. If he had the opportunity to draw a vial of its blood back to Earth, he wondered what kind of results could be obtained from it. "I wonder if there are dragons in this world." He didn't know that there was one in the palace of the Great Xia dynasty. After half a month, everyone finally saw a black wall appear on the horizon. That was Lan City. Since 3 days ago, the mounted scouts in Lan City had been arriving one after another. All the officials in the city had been waiting for the Empress to return. As they walked forward, they saw a large crowd of people standing outside the city gate. Almost everyone in the imperial court, except for those on duty, had come out to welcome them. Renbochin jumped down from Chishui's back and climbed onto another mount. It would be too ostentatious to ride the same horse as the Empress in front of all the court officials and commoners in the city. This time, the Empress didn't stop him. In the eyes of the Empress, Hongwu was different from the others. She wanted to make her stand clear. "Your subjects welcome your majesty." At the city gate, 200 to 300 people were shouting in unison. Behind them, there were many commoners who were watching the commotion. They wanted to catch a glimpse of the Empress, but they were separated by the soldiers. The Empress nodded her head slightly and said faintly, "It has been hard on all of you during my absence. Let's return to the palace." The commoners on both sides of the city were standing by the roadside to watch the commotion. When they saw the Empress sitting on Chishui's back, they cheered incessantly. The Empress was very popular in Dayo. Furthermore, it had already been more than 20 days since the Empress defeated Hua Sanlu and destroyed the 9 pavilions. News of this had already spread to Lan City and the commoners. The commoners didn't know the reason why the Empress went to the 9 pavilions, but they cheered for her bravery. At this moment, the Empress was slowly moving forward on Chishui's back. She was welcomed by the cheers of tens of thousands of people, making her look exceptionally dazzling. Those commoners wanted to see the Empress. Some of them even took a look at the radiant Renbachian who was following behind. Everyone returned to the palace. The Empress went to the throne room to discuss matters while Renbachian went straight back to Pingle Park. This could be considered his home in this world. Other than the Beast Park, this was the place he had stayed in for the longest time. After returning, he immediately felt relaxed and at ease. He threw himself onto the bed, rolled around, and immediately fell asleep after a wave of drowsiness. Meanwhile, in the throne room, everyone started talking about how the Empress abandoned the entire imperial court to go to Great Xia. Almost everyone in the imperial court started to make things difficult for her. The Empress's face immediately turned cold. Are you guys trying to rebel? We don't dare to. It's just that Your Majesty is the ruler of a nation, yet you abandoned millions of people in Dayo and went to such a dangerous place for one person. This behavior is really inappropriate. If I can't even protect one person, how can I be an empress? The Empress said coldly. But we are really worried about Your Majesty's safety. What's there to worry about? Is there anyone who can stop me? The Empress sneered. In that case, why did Your Majesty say that if you can't come back, we will find that person and bring him back? Shi Qing said. The Empress was momentarily speechless. How could she not know the dangers of going to Great Xia? It was only right for her to leave behind such an explanation. However, at this moment, when Shi Qing said it, she immediately lost her composure. She was silent for a while, then flew into a rage out of humiliation. Her entire body erupted with an imposing aura that blotted out the sky and covered the earth. Like a tsunami, it pressed down on everyone, forcing them to take a few steps back. Your Majesty! Everyone said in unison. With a cold face, the Empress gradually withdrew her imposing aura. After a moment of deliberation, she opened her mouth and said, "In the future, unless it's necessary, I won't easily put myself in danger." However, these words were as good as not saying anything. If it was necessary, she would still do what she had to do. In any case, she gave both parties a way out. In fact, everyone already knew that this would happen. It would be strange if the Empress admitted her mistake. However, what needed to be said still had to be said. At the very least, they had to express their attitude. Otherwise, what would they do if the Empress acted more recklessly in the future? This time, everyone was almost anxious to death. Where's Tai Yan? Seeing that everyone had calmed down, the Empress immediately shouted for someone to come out. I'm here. Immediately, a man who was shorter than the rest but very sturdy stood out. This was the head of the Public Security Bureau, Tai Yan. Back then, when Renbachian was ambushed, he was the one who hurriedly led people to investigate the scene. Have you found anything? The Empress asked coldly. Tai Yan knew what the Empress wanted to ask without saying it clearly. He immediately replied, Your Majesty, the 4 people that day were kamikaze warriors. I couldn't find many traces of them. The weapons and crossbows they used and the clothes they wore were all produced in the Yun nation. During this period of time, I didn't dare to relax for even a moment. Finally, I found out that they came from Great Xia to the Yun nation and then from there to Lan City. Their lodgings were arranged by a shopkeeper in Lan City from the Yun nation with the surname Su. I have already thrown all the members of the Su family into prison. However, after interrogating them, they almost didn't know anything. It was arranged by the shopkeeper after receiving a sum of money from the other party. In other words, you only know that they came to Great Xia and nothing else. The Empress asked coldly. Your Majesty, please forgive me for my incompetence, Tai Yan said. Continue to investigate. I will give you another 3 months. I want to know who has such guts. Chapter 224. Renbochin slept for more than 2 hours. After he got out of bed, he stretched his body and called for someone to prepare a medicinal bath. His strength had not increased for a long time. Now that he was back, he could finally enjoy the pleasure of rapidly increasing his strength. An increase of 15 kilograms in a week was already very fast for him. In 1 month, it would be 60 jin. In 2 months, it would be 120 jin. In 3 months, his strength would be more than 300 jin. Just thinking about it made him a little excited. After soaking in the medicinal bath, Renbochin felt that the Empress should be tired from the journey. After the meeting, she should be resting in Yangxin Palace Hall. As such, he returned to his room and waited until it was almost time for the Empress to have her dinner before heading to Yangxin Palace Hall to meet her. Along the way, everyone rolled their eyes at him. Even though the Empress had returned, they were still on tenterhooks. Renbochin was the main culprit. When they arrived at Yangxin Palace Hall, the Empress was still yawning. It seemed like she had just woken up. "Your Majesty, how was your rest?" Renbochin asked. The Empress shook her head and remained silent. She still looked a little sleepy. Renbochin knew that it had been hard on her these days. Beside him, Qing Yuan brought a chair over. Renbochin sat on it for a while and told the Empress about one thing. The sweet potatoes planted in the Beast Park had already matured. It was time to dig them up and see how they were doing. "Is it the grain that can produce 5,000 kilograms per mu that you mentioned?" The Empress was much more clear-headed after hearing this. "Yes, it's hard to say if it can produce 10,000 caddies per mu, but it should be around 6 to 7,000 caddies. The most important thing is that it's not picky. It can be grown on any kind of land, even on a mountain," Renbochin said. "Very well. After the morning court session tomorrow, I will bring some people over." The Empress nodded her head. Food was a big deal, especially when it came to high-yielding crops that could be grown anywhere. Dayo didn't produce a lot of food, and it didn't import a lot of food from other countries either. Dayo completely relied on animal husbandry. Especially in the mountains, they mainly relied on hunting and picking wild fruits and vegetables. If this kind of sweet potato was really as Renbochin said, it would really be very useful. "Your Majesty, do you have any farmland?" Renbochin asked another question. "What's that?" The Empress was slightly puzzled. "In other words, the imperial plantation belongs to His Majesty." Renbochin explained. The seasonings that he planted should have matured by now. Furthermore, he was also preparing to plant some other things, such as cotton, which could be used to make cotton cloth. He couldn't just rely on the 1 or 2 plots of land in the Beast Park. They were completely useless. "This world belongs to me," the Empress said. However, it was only after hearing this that Renbochin realized that the imperial family of Dayo actually didn't have exclusive farmland. It was really unexpected. She didn't have any farmland, and she only had 2 merchant caravans that were mainly responsible for purchasing goods from the various countries. It was no wonder that the Empress lived a simple life. However, this was also because the previous emperors didn't put much thought into it. After all, the conditions in Dayo weren't considered good, and they didn't have the capital to be extravagant. However, didn't the former emperor of Dayo consider that he couldn't afford the monthly salary of the palace maids? No wonder there were so few palace maids in the palace. "Who does the land outside Lon City belong to?" Renbochin asked. "They have all been distributed to the meritorious soldiers," the Empress replied. "Can I buy some?" Renbochin looked at the Empress, and the Empress looked back at him with her clear and bright eyes. However, her eyes were filled with confusion. When Renbochin saw this, he thought to himself, "Forget it, the Empress really doesn't know anything about this." I better ask someone else. Later, I will ask someone to see if I can buy some. Later, I will plant some seasonings and sell them. The profits will be huge, Renbochin said. You make the arrangements, the Empress said indifferently. She really didn't care about these things. Your Majesty, where does the imperial family's income come from? Renbochin still felt that he should ask. The Empress replied without hesitation, the imperial family has some gold and silver mines. Renbochin then knew where the imperial family's money came from. He really didn't know much about the mines in Dayo, but he assumed that the imperial family didn't have much. He still had to think of more ways in the future. In that case, Your Majesty, rest early. I won't disturb you any further. Renbochin cupped his hands and left. The next morning, he left the palace and headed to the Beast Park. It had been 2 months since he last came to the Beast Park. Standing at the entrance of the Beast Park, he felt a little sad. When he first came to this world, he was still thinking about how to earn money. He even started a shaved ice shop with caretakershire. In just a few months, who would have thought that things would turn out this way? It wasn't that he didn't understand, but the changes were really too fast. This time around, Renbochin didn't have 2 people following him. Instead, he had a total of 10 people surrounding him. It looked rather imposing. When he entered the Beast Park, he saw caretakershire swaying around like a crab from afar. When he saw this group of people, he quickly came forward to welcome them. When he saw Renbochin, his face revealed a look of surprise. Deputy Prefect Ren. Caretakershire greeted him. Renbochin's current status was different from before. He didn't dare to address him as brother anymore. If Her Majesty knew about this, she would skin him alive. Caretakershire, I can finally come back to take a look. Renbochin was all smiles. It was still that familiar smell, that familiar formula, and that loud voice that sounded like a loudspeaker. Deputy Prefect Ren, you are always welcome to come and take a look. Caretakershire patted his chest and said. How are the 2 plots of land? Renbochin first asked. This was his target this time around. There are people taking care of them, but the seasonings seem to have matured. Caretakershire's answer made Renbochin very satisfied. How are Tian Tian and Gun Gun? Renbochin asked. After not seeing them for such a long time, he still missed them a little. They have grown fatter. I will bring Caretaker Ren to take a look. Caretakershire laughed. Renbochin nodded his head and walked side by side with Caretakershire. Along the way, he saw many familiar faces. Some of them used to be his odd job workers. There were also Tinghulu and Tai Dao. They all greeted him from afar. Renbochin didn't say much. In his heart, he planned to ask these 2 people to come over. After all, he still wanted to ask about the land. He couldn't possibly do it himself, right? There were also some miscellaneous matters that could be handled by these 2 people. It was still the same house that he used to live in. However, the entrance was surrounded by a fence. Tian Tian was standing on Gungun's body and was looking inside through the window. It was probably wondering why Renbochin had not returned after such a long time. When it noticed that someone was coming over, Tian Tian turned around clumsily and fell off Gungun's body. Renbochin pushed open the courtyard door. The 2 little chaps stared blankly at him for a long time before recognizing him. They slowly crawled to his side, hugged his legs, and begged for food. Renbochin touched the 2 little chaps. Indeed, they were much fatter than before. They were almost the size of a ball and appeared more honest and adorable. Renbochin decided to bring these 2 little chaps back to Pingle Park. It was quite fun to see them when he had nothing to do. It was just that their teeth were a little sharp and didn't know how to control their strength. Tian Tian accidentally scratched the back of his hand with her teeth. He was so angry that he gave her a slap on the head. After teasing the two little chaps, Renbachien stood up and left. He followed caretaker Shi to the field to take a look. From afar, it was a stretch of green. First, he went to the sweet potato field. He got someone to take a shovel and dig along the roots of the vines. He immediately pulled out a bunch of sweet potatoes that were stained with mud. The big ones were the size of a fist. The small ones weren't much smaller either. Renbachien lifted them with his hand and estimated that they weighed at least 5 to 6 kilograms. He got someone to dig another 2 places. Both places yielded a lot of sweet potatoes. These 3 places yielded more than 10 kilograms of sweet potatoes. This plot of land could yield at least 6 to 7,000 kilograms of sweet potatoes. It was considered to have met his expectations. Looking at the pile of sweet potatoes, Renbachien was in a good mood. After all, this was the change that he had brought to Deo. He said to caretaker Shi, "Get someone to wash them. Get the kitchen to steam half of them and roast the other half. Someone will come over in a while." Following which, he went to another field to take a look. The pepper, anise, sesame, and cumin were indeed ripe. Some of them had fallen into the ground. It was just that the people in the beast park didn't know how to harvest them. They were afraid that they would spoil them, so they left them alone. Instead, they collected the ones that fell to the ground and waited for Renbachien to come back and deal with them. Renbachien stayed by the field until it was almost noon. Only then did he see a group of people coming over from afar. Chapter 225. There were quite a lot of people behind the Empress. Renbachien recognized Great Elder Shi, Junior Elder Zhikohai, Minister of Revenue Tu Wan, Imperial Treasurer Guyu, Minister of Works Tongjianye, and a few others. Among them, Renbachien recognized those who were wearing sunglasses that cost 20 yuan that they bought from street stalls. They wore branded sunglasses and each of them resembled a gang leader. They stood out from the crowd like a crane among chickens and were extremely eye-catching. Everyone in the Beast Park was shocked when Her Majesty brought so many high-ranking officials with her. They didn't know what was going on. "Your Majesty!" Everyone. Renbachien greeted everyone. The Empress nodded. Tongjianye was all smiles. After all, Renbachien was fine now. The glass factory and other things that Renbachien mentioned could be resumed. Ever since he heard that the Empress and Renbachien returned safe and sound, he immediately ordered his subordinates to gather all the things that Renbachien mentioned. He even brought back 3 carts of coal. Even though one cart couldn't transport much at this time, it showed how much importance he placed on this matter. Therefore, apart from the Empress, he was the one who was most concerned about Renbachien's life. Besides Tongjianye, Renbachien was surprised that Great Elder Shi also smiled at him in a friendly manner. Great Elder and Hongwu were the pillars of Dao's commoners. In fact, this was indeed the case. Hongwu had been guarding the border for many years and prevented Great Xiao from advancing. He even made a name for himself in the Protectorate of the North. Shi had been in the imperial court for many years and had done many practical things for the benefit of countless commoners. His reputation in Dao was extremely high. Renbachien was surprised to see such a person express goodwill to him amidst a crowd of people. In addition, even though Shi looked old, he held great power all year round. His imposing manner, coupled with his sunglasses, immediately reminded Renbachien of those Hong Kong and Taiwanese movies where the big boss patted his henchman's shoulder and said, "Do well, I have high hopes for you." "Deputy Prefect Ren, how is the sweet potato you mentioned?" the Empress asked. Bringing so many people here was indeed a big deal. On the other hand, it was to boost Renbachien's prestige. If there were any mistakes, the Empress would lose face and Renbachien would be in trouble. "Your Majesty, it has ripened. We can dig it out and weigh it now." I have also dug out some for the kitchen to cook. Everyone, please have a taste. Alright, let's begin. Now, it all depended on how much this one moo of land could produce. While everyone was digging in the beast park, everyone waited quietly at the side. Before they came, His Majesty said that he wanted to see the new crop, but no one knew the details. However, Dayo wasn't a big agricultural country, and the Aboriginals mainly ate meat. Crops weren't as important as animal husbandry, so they didn't pay much attention to it. A new crop could only add one more dish to the plate. However, those big shots who were wearing sunglasses thought more. After all, they had seen the solar hearthstone previously and felt that it wouldn't be an ordinary item. As time passed, piles of sweet potato tubers were dug out from the ground and piled up to the side. An old man wearing a third-ranked official robe didn't care about the mud. He picked up a few sweet potatoes from the ground and examined them. At this time, someone brought over 2 pots of steamed and roasted sweet potatoes. Everyone, have a taste. This thing tastes pretty good. Renbochin said to everyone. He took out a roasted sweet potato and peeled it in the middle, revealing the reddish-gold interior. A fragrant and sweet smell assailed their nostrils and could be smelled from afar. Everyone had been standing in the imperial court for the whole morning and felt even hungrier after smelling the sweet potato. They looked at each other and then at Renbochin. Renbochin presented the peeled sweet potato to the Empress and said, "Your Majesty." The Empress took it and sized it up. The skin didn't look very clean, but it smelled fragrant and sweet. It was very appetizing. Usually, the food that the Empress ate would be tested by someone before being handed to her. However, she didn't care about the food that Renbochin handed to her. After all, no one tested it for poison on Earth, so she wasn't guarded against him. She opened her pearly white teeth and took a bite. Her eyes brightened up. This thing tasted really good. Everyone couldn't stop her in time. Seeing the Empress eat it, they looked at Renbochin twice. "I'll try." Tongjinya didn't hesitate. Since Her Majesty had already eaten it, why would you be afraid of poison? "Give me one as well," Shirqing called out from behind him. In an instant, the roasted sweet potatoes were all grabbed by a bunch of big hands. The rest of the people had no choice but to get steamed sweet potatoes. Everyone took a bite. With the sweet potatoes in their mouths, they nodded and said, "Not bad, not bad." This thing smelled good and tasted good. It was soft, fragrant, and tasty. A bunch of big shots in the imperial court surrounded the sweet potatoes like a bunch of old farmers. They nodded and praised the sweet potatoes incessantly. The scene was extremely lively. "What's this called?" someone asked after eating a few bites. Renbochin noticed that it was the official who went forward to check the sweet potatoes just now. He had some guesses about his identity. "I call it a sweet potato." "In fact, it should be called a sweet potato," Renbochin said. "How long does it take to ripen?" 3 months. Furthermore, it's not picky about the land. It can be planted after clearing a piece of land on the hillside. "It's very easy to take care of," Renbochin said. "How much can one moo of land produce?" that official asked again. "You will know after weighing it in a while," Renbochin said. "However, you can't eat too much of this thing. You have to eat it with other food. Otherwise, you will get a heartburn." That official nodded and didn't say anything else. His pair of bright eyes stared at the pile of sweet potatoes. Based on the current situation, the number of sweet potatoes wasn't small. He had a guess in his heart, but he didn't dare to believe it. At this moment, after eating and looking at the pile of sweet potatoes that had been dug out, the rest of the people started to look forward to it. According to what Deputy Prefect Ren said just now, these sweet potatoes were not picky about the land and could be planted anywhere. This was very important. Coupled with other food, the lives of those villages in the 60,000 mountains would be much better. Furthermore, there would be one more type of good food on the table of the commoners. Very soon, almost all the sweet potatoes in the field had been dug out. Someone moved the scale to one side and weighed the sweet potatoes. Renbachien was originally prepared to go over and help with the calculation. He was very confident in the mathematical ability of the aboriginals. Who would believe that a group of more than 10 people would have to count with their fingers? However, he stopped in his tracks when he saw the people from the Ministry of Revenue. The Ministry of Revenue should be more reliable. 3,163 pounds. 3,752 pounds. 4,860 pounds. 5,925 pounds. 6,451 pounds. Every time a number came out from the mouth of the people from the Ministry of Revenue, everyone's heart would skip a beat. They were afraid that they had calculated wrongly, and all of them gathered around to take a look. Even the voice of the people from the Ministry of Revenue was trembling when they announced the number. They even suspected that they had calculated wrongly. There was too much. Too much was dug out. Previously, no one would have thought that there would be so much. Currently, the yield of rice outside the city was only 500 to 600 caddies per moo, but this thing was actually more than 6,000 caddies. 10 times, 10 times. Chapter 226. 6,451 caddies. It was confirmed 3 times in a row. The official who first checked the sweet potato stared at it nervously, fearing that he would make a mistake in his calculation. After confirming that the number was correct, everyone was in an uproar. It was too much. This product called sweet potato was not picky and could be eaten as a supplementary food. Furthermore, the yield was so high that it was 10 times higher than rice. If it was about the same or slightly higher than rice, no one would care. However, it was so much higher and the value was different. As long as the cultivation of sweet potatoes continued, Dayo would not need to buy food in the future. The secondary class, rank 3 official who checked the sweet potato laughed heartily. Congratulations, Your Majesty. This sweet potato is very useful for Dayo. We will no longer have to worry about food shortage in the future. Everyone turned to the Empress with a joyful look on their faces. The Empress was in a good mood after listening to everyone's comments. Renbachien did not drop the bowl. The yield of more than 6,000 kilograms per moo was already amazing enough. She looked at Renbachien and said, "You have made a great contribution to this sweet potato." "Thank you, Your Majesty." Renbachien thanked her timely. Although it was not very useful to him, after all, getting promoted and getting rich was meaningless to him now. However, it was a good thing to be able to raise his status in the imperial court and among the people of Dayo. However, the yield of more than 6,000 kilograms per moo was not a surprise. It was said that this sweet potato could produce more than 10,000 kilograms per moo. Dayo's land was also very fertile, but the final yield was only about 6,000 kilograms. It was a pity that he did not know much about this area and only looked up some information. However, he still remembered that sandy soil should be better than this kind of solid land. Gui Hong, asked Deputy Prefect Ren about this sweet potato and expand the cultivation as soon as possible. The Empress instructed. Yes. Gui Hong was the secondary class, rank 3 official who checked the sweet potato previously. He was under the Ministry of Works and was in charge of agriculture and animal husbandry. He understood the current situation of Dayo's agriculture better than anyone else. Naturally, he knew the astonishing yield of this sweet potato. Your Majesty, there is still the matter of the glass factory and Mount Damo. Tong Jingye quickly stepped forward and said. He immediately pushed Gui Hong to the side with his butt sticking out. Although the sweet potato was important, he still had a lot of things to do. Previously, Renbachien gave him a big pie. He could only see it but not eat it. He had been thinking about it for a long time. Now that Rinpoche was finally back, how could he let Rinpoche farm? Gui Hong was so angry that he glared at him. However, the other party was the Minister of Works, and he was only the Minister of Agriculture and Animal Husbandry. Of course, at this level, even if Tong Jinye was his immediate superior, it wasn't that important. The most important thing was that he couldn't defeat him. You can discuss it later. In her heart, the iron mine at Mount Damo was still the most important matter. However, she didn't know much about it, so she let them make their own arrangements. Tong Jinye gave Rinpoche a sinister smile that he thought was extremely kind. After looking at it, everyone had an idea in their hearts, so there was no need to stay any longer. The group of people prepared to leave. Gui Hong pointed to the field not far away and asked what was there. Spices, Rinpoche answered simply. For the time being, he was going to get a plot of land to plant it and then go to those 3 countries to earn money. This thing was absolutely profiteering. The money he earned could also be used to buy other supplies and fill up the palace's treasury. In a few years, he would slowly open up the cultivation of seasonings. Upon hearing that it was spices, Gui Hong's eyes lit up. He excused himself to the Empress and immediately ran over. There were many new spices in the palace, and all the court officials had heard of them. After all, they had appeared at the Empress's birthday banquet. Although the dishes at that time didn't look like much, they tasted extremely good. Everyone could immediately taste the difference. It was just that there were some in the palace, and basically no one else knew about it. Everyone had only heard of it, but had never seen it before. After hearing that it was spices, many people were interested. The large group of people moved to the vicinity of that plot of land and walked around for half a day. However, they didn't know much about these things, so they just watched for fun. After asking for half a day and hearing that the imperial family would buy land to plant and sell it, they could only look forward to it. In any case, it was fine as long as they could buy it. There was no need to grab everything. Even if they wanted to grab it, could they snatch it from the Empress? After walking around for a long time, Gui Hong couldn't help but say, I still feel that Deputy Prefect Ren should come to the Department of Agriculture and Animal Husbandry. It just so happens that the Department of Agriculture and Animal Husbandry is still lacking a junior minister. The sweet potatoes and spices that Rinpoche produced made him feel that Rinpoche definitely had other good things in his hands. It would be a pity if he couldn't poach them to the Department of Agriculture and Livestock. Everyone looked at him sideways. They had seen shameless people, but they had never seen such a shameless person who lied with his eyes wide open. The Assistant Minister of the Department of Agriculture and Livestock is busy every day, and you treat him as if he doesn't exist with just one sentence. If Rinpoche really went to the Department of Agriculture and Livestock, what would you do? Create 2 assistant ministers? However, seeing how he ignored everyone's disdainful eyes and remained calm and composed, many people felt that this shameless look was similar to their demeanor in the past. After staying in the Beast Park for half a day, everyone left one after another. Tong Jinye kept asking Rinpoche when he was going to the Ministry of Works, and Gui Hong kept asking about the situation of the sweet potatoes. With great difficulty, Rinpoche finally followed the Empress back to the palace for his meal. After sitting in the garden with the Empress for a while and enjoying the peace, he ran to Qingxin Palace Hall to look for Lin Chaola to learn how to write. Previously, he was assassinated halfway through learning, and now, he had forgotten a lot. At night, he made another trip to Qingxin Palace Hall. Following which, both of them appeared in the room on Earth. At this time, it was already June on Earth, and it was starting to get hot. Rinpoche opened the door to the room to ventilate. Looking at the time, it was only 7:00 in the evening. He turned around and said to the Empress, who was habitually hugging her legs and sitting on the sofa, Zixiao, do you want to go out for a walk? In summer, the city is much livelier and more beautiful than in winter. All right. The Empress nodded. In this world, other than buying red dresses whenever she saw them in the shopping mall, she didn't have any objections to the itinerary. After all, everything in this world was very novel to her. In particular, the peaceful and affluent atmosphere of this world made her feel exceptionally comfortable and at ease. She never had to think about other things, and all the complicated matters in the imperial court were far away from her. The night in the city at the end of spring and beginning of summer was very beautiful. The entire city gave off a feeling of vitality. The roadside was filled with pedestrians taking a stroll. There were teenagers wearing headphones, people dancing in the open space, young mothers pushing strollers, and young parents holding skewers in their hands while taking their children out on the streets. When the Empress first came, there weren't so many people in the city at night. Renbochin drove to the supermarket to buy a bunch of things and stuffed them into the car. The Empress hugged a bucket of popcorn and suddenly felt that it was pretty delicious. Chapter 227. After placing the things in the car, Renbochin and the Empress walked to a plaza not far away. From afar, they could hear the music coming from the plaza. There were also many people surrounding the plaza. When they got closer, they could see dozens of people dancing in the plaza. The rhythm was very cheerful. Even though some of them were old, there were more young people. They were sweating profusely as they danced in a pleasing manner. Needless to say, there were a few girls with good figures. They were already wearing shorts at the beginning of June. Renbochin only took a glance at them before he felt a murderous aura permeating the air. He immediately turned his head and saw the Empress looking at him coldly. Both of them looked at each other for a while. The Empress turned her head slightly and continued to eat her popcorn. "What's that?" the Empress asked casually. She had seen them a few times on the way here, but she didn't really understand what they were doing. Plaza dancing. Plaza dancing. Showy but impractical, the Empress said indifferently. A row of question marks appeared in Renbochin's head. Following which, he looked at the movements of those people and realized that it really looked like plaza dancing. Only then did he come to a realization and immediately held back his laughter. The commoners usually exercise when they have nothing to do. Most people don't usually exercise. After a long time, their bodies will rust. Renbochin didn't expose the Empress's misunderstanding and casually explained. This was a scene that only existed in modern society. In ancient times or that world, commoners had to run around every day to fill their stomachs. They didn't have time to care about other things. At the same time, modern society used all kinds of machinery, which greatly reduced manual labor. Many people sat or lay down every day except on the road. As a result, various kinds of exercise methods were developed. After listening to Renbochin's explanation, the Empress could understand this point after thinking for a while. This kind of improvement in the pursuit of life was also something that she was most envious of. Only when civilization developed to a certain level could it appear. The word civilization was taught by Renbochin. Renbochin walked past this group of people and saw another group of people dancing in the square a little further away. They were mainly elderly people, and their movements were much slower. The boundless horizon is my love, flowers are blooming at the foot of the continuous green hills, what kind of rhythm is the most swaying? This demonic voice drilled into their heads, and Renbochin hurriedly moved further away. Inside, there were many people out for a walk at night. There were even children skating on roller skates. A few teenagers on skateboards were doing all sorts of things not far away. When they saw a beautiful woman in red looking at them, they immediately performed some tricks. Their every move revealed the words seeking attention. Then, they slipped and knelt on the ground, immediately causing a burst of laughter. Renbochin and the Empress walked on this lively public square. They even saw a woman in her 50s teaching a few youngsters how to fight. Her movements weren't fast, but they were very soothing and pleasing to the eye. He watched from the side for a while. From their words, they seemed to be participating in some kind of competition. What do you think? Renbochin wanted to hear the Empress's opinion on martial arts. The Empress shook her head and didn't say anything. He was too weak and didn't need to be evaluated. Furthermore, this kind of fighting technique that was used by ordinary people wasn't very meaningful to the commoners of the Aboriginals. The Aboriginals had been living in the 60,000 mountains, fighting with wild beasts and fighting for territory among the villages. They had long developed a set of martial arts and moves that were suitable for the Aboriginals. The two of them walked around in circles on the public square. Suddenly, a man in his 30s stopped them. "Excuse me, do you want to make a movie? I have a movie that is currently lacking 2 roles, and one of them is the female lead. I think both of you are very suitable, especially this lady. If you are willing to participate, you will definitely rise to fame and enter the entertainment industry." Renbochin thought that he was a scammer. There were too many such cases on the internet. However, after taking a closer look, he realized that the man was in his 30s. His hair was a little long and messy. He was wearing a cap and carrying a bag. He looked very sincere and pleasantly surprised. It was as if he had finally found the person he was looking for after searching for a long time. "I'll give you 99 points for your acting. I'm missing 1 point because I'm afraid you will become arrogant." Renbochin laughed. "My name is Du Ruffing. This is my name card. I'm really the director. I have meticulously prepared for this movie for several years. Now that everything is ready, all that's left is the female lead." That man quickly took out his name card from his pocket and handed it to the Empress. However, the Empress didn't even bother with him. She turned her head and looked at Renbochin. Her eyes were filled with questions like, "Can I send him flying now?" "Not interested." Renbochin immediately waved his hand. The two of them turned around and left. This man seemed to be genuine. He was indeed a director. He was indeed very imaginative. It was a very creative idea to let the Empress be the female lead. You can consider it more. With your image, it would be a waste if you don't act in a movie. As long as you stand there, you don't need to speak, and the audience's eyes will be on you. Du Ruffing didn't give up and moved closer to the Empress. Renbochin quickly grabbed the Empress's wrist. Otherwise, Du Ruffing would be sent flying in the next second. Bang! Du Ruffing was still sent flying. Everyone present didn't see how the Empress made her move. Her movements were really too fast. I say, if you want to fake an accident, you should at least act more realistically, right? Nowadays, no matter what you do, you have to be professional. How are you going to earn money if you're not professional? You were sent flying without even touching him. Furthermore, isn't this flying too exaggerated? Renbochin was shocked and despised. Originally, the Empress's appearance had always been attractive. At least half of the surrounding people's gazes were on her. At this moment, this unforeseen event happened, and many people were watching the commotion. After hearing Renbochin's words, many people started to ridicule him. Indeed, if you could send someone flying so far, it would be more likely if the boxing champion was here. You moved closer to the Empress and then flew yourself. Did you think that everyone else was a fool? Let's go, Renbochin said to the Empress. Just like that, the two of them minded their own business and left. After the two of them left for a long time, Du Ruffing was still lying there motionless. When someone went over to take a look, they realized that he had fainted. However, no one thought that it was that extremely beautiful lady in red who had hit him. After all, there were so many people watching at that time. It wasn't just 1 or 2 people who were peeking at the Empress. Renbachien and the Empress walked one round around the square and received countless envious and jealous gazes. Only then did they return to the house. Do you like this place? Do you think we should buy this house or change to another place to stay? Renbachien asked casually when he entered the house. He was considering whether to continue staying here or change to another villa. It seemed to be a good idea to buy a place to stay in Yenzhou. The air there was good, and it was like spring all year round. Most importantly, there were bikinis. This place is also not bad. The Empress didn't know what Renbachien was thinking and casually said. After all, she had stayed here since the first time she came to this world and was already very familiar with it. Furthermore, she didn't have many requirements for a house. This kind of small house was actually more to her liking. It was much better than seeing an empty palace when she woke up. In that case, let's buy this place. Renbachien nodded. Since this landlord had been renting out the house all year round, he would probably sell it. After that, he would go to Yenzhou to buy a house. After putting down the things, Renbachien took out a set of checkers that he had just bought and sat on the sofa to play with the Empress. In Renbachien's heart, this kind of board game was second only to Gamoku. The Empress played it for the first time. Then, she immediately flipped the table. Boring, the Empress said with disdain. She picked up the remote control and turned on the television. Renbachien looked at the chess pieces that had been smashed into powder on the table and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Originally, he was prepared to win a few games first and then slowly go easy on her to create the illusion that she was improving very quickly. Reality proved that he was absolutely thinking too much. How about we play Gamoku? Renbachien suggested tirelessly. The Empress didn't even bat an eye. She directly threw the remote control to him and said, I want to watch a movie. Although I like her very much, I still didn't tell her. Because I know that what I can't get is always the best. If a relationship could be won or lost, I don't know if she would win. But I am very clear that I lost from the beginning. In the past, I thought that sentence was very important. When I said it, it seemed like it would last a lifetime. But now that I think about it, it's not a big deal. Some things will change. If one day, I can't help but ask you who is the person you like the most, please lie to me. No matter how unwilling you are, please tell me that the person you like the most is me. The Empress switched off the lights. The light from the television flickered on and off on her face. Listening to the lines from the movie, Evil in the West, the Empress looked pensive as she hugged a pillow. Then, she turned her head to look at Renbachien. She then turned her head back to watch the movie in high spirits and stuffed a piece of chocolate into her mouth. On the other hand, the more Renbachien listened to the lines, the more he regretted choosing this movie. At first, he thought that it was quite a classic. But now that he looked at it again, what kind of messy lines were these? People are always unaware of what they have. Only after they have lost it, they can't forget it. That's why there are few happy people and many sad people. In fact, many times, it's enough to just hold on to what you have, Renbachien said with a deep look, intending to distract the Empress. He made up his mind that from today onwards, Wang Jiawei would live a life of darkness. Chapter 228. Boss, 2 bowls of tofu pudding. 2 trays of steamed buns. Renbachien and the Empress attracted a lot of attention when they walked into the breakfast shop. It would be normal to see such a woman in a 5-star hotel, but it was strange to see her in a small breakfast shop. Sweet or salty? It's salty. Renbachien answered matter-of-factly. There's even savory tofu pudding in this world. Can that thing be eaten? Sweet. The Empress couldn't understand other words, but she could understand this, sweet. Renbachien and the Empress looked at each other. After a while, the tofu pudding was served. The Empress frowned when she saw the thick braised soup. However, she still took a sip and found that the taste was pretty good. After breakfast, when they were driving past the plaza, the Empress suddenly said, "How about building 2 such plazas in Lawn City?" Yesterday, she walked around the square with Renbochin. The ordinary people there were either exercising or having fun. Their leisurely attitudes and satisfied expressions made her feel that having such a place in the city wasn't bad. That's possible, but it doesn't make much sense. In fact, the infrastructure of many cities is more important. I see that many places in the city are still dirt roads, and there are puddles of water everywhere after the rain. The drainage system in the city relied on the ditches, and if it rained heavily, the ditches would often flood. Currently, it was difficult to transform Lawn City. It was even more troublesome than rebuilding a city. Why don't we build a new city like this after we earn money? Renbochin pointed to the surroundings. Then, we'll gradually transform the old city into twin cities. The prerequisite is that we have to make money first. Renbochin turned his head and said. The more he talked, the more he deviated from the topic. Unknowingly, he changed the topic from building a plaza to building a new city. Both of them actually didn't find anything wrong with it. However, Lawn City was a remnant of the former Han Nation, and its facilities were too backward. It was much easier to build a new city than to renovate it. Furthermore, they could plan all kinds of facilities from the very beginning. Especially after making cement, it would be very easy to build a city. It was no longer like before, where they had to cut out rocks from afar to grind and transport them over a long distance. The only problem was the Imperial Palace. It was not easy to rebuild the Imperial Palace, especially those gardens. Of course, this was just a city and didn't have much significance to Dao as a whole. If he wanted to rapidly improve the infrastructure of Dao, he would need an astronomical amount of money. To change Dao as a whole, there was still a long way to go. It wasn't just a matter of money. After he went back, he would create a comparison table between Chinese characters and Dao characters within a short period of time. Then, he would recruit a few people to translate some basic scientific knowledge into Dao characters and train a batch of students. After a few years, this batch of students who had learned some basic physics and chemistry would be the spark. If everything depended on him, he would die earlier than Zhuge Liang. He would die of exhaustion. The two of them wandered around the earth for 3 days and finally returned to Yangxin Palace Hall with bags of various sizes. 2 drones. He had bought 5 drones in a short period of time. Even the boss of the specialty store knew him. As for the solar energy storage battery, he brought along 2 small storage batteries. Renbochin was actually optimistic about a type of storage battery that could store 3.6 kilowatt-hours of electricity and the supporting equipment. It would be sufficient for the lighting, electric fans, and other equipment in Yangxin Palace Hall. It was a pity that it was too heavy. The entire set, including the packaging, weighed 70 kilograms. He could only bring it next time. This time, he brought 20 walkie-talkies with him. It would be convenient for him to communicate with others. For example, if the Empress wanted to look for Renbochin, she could directly use the walkie-talkie. It could be used as a mobile phone within a short distance. This time around, he wasn't using the mass-produced walkie-talkies. This time around, he was using a branded walkie-talkie. It could be used as a mobile phone within a short distance. After returning to Yangxin Palace Hall, Renbochin first adjusted the 2 specially prepared walkie-talkies. These 2 were the most expensive and had the most powerful functions. They could even monitor other channels. He handed one to the Empress and carried the other one. At the same time, he left a solar energy storage battery with the Empress. Only then did he get someone to carry the bags back to Pingle Park. Renbochin went back to his room and lay on his bed for a while. He took out the walkie-talkie and called the Empress. When he heard some noise coming from the other side, Renbochin spoke into the walkie-talkie, "Your Majesty." After a while, the Empress's voice came from the other side, "What's the matter?" At this moment, Hong Yuan and Qing Yuan, who weren't far from the Empress, widened their eyes and looked at the small orange box in the Empress's hands. Furthermore, it was Deputy Prefect Ren's voice. Renbochin pondered for a while. He was just bored and teasing the Empress. If he were to speak the truth, he would probably get beaten up. Hence, he said, "I tried to use the signal. Now that I have tested it, good night, Your Majesty." The other side immediately switched off the walkie-talkie. Renbochin grinned and placed the walkie-talkie aside. He first entered the visualization of water, to cultivate. After a while, he woke up and fell asleep on his bed. Meanwhile, in Yangxin Palace Hall, the Empress stared blankly at the walkie-talkie in her hands. The corner of her mouth curled up slightly. It seemed that this palace hall wasn't that cold and desolate anymore. She waved at Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan, "Both of you can leave now." After placing the walkie-talkie aside, she lay down on her bed. Early the next morning, Renbochin brought along a stack of papers that recorded the craftsmanship of cement and the characteristics of various ores. He left the palace and headed to the Ministry of Works. 10 tall and strong imperial bodyguards surrounded him. Renbochin's small body was immediately submerged in the crowd. It was as if he was surrounded by a wall. The guards of the Ministry of Works had a deep impression of Deputy Prefect Ren, who was assassinated the moment he left the Ministry of Works. Furthermore, Tong Jinye had specially taken care of Renbochin. Renbochin was invited in the moment he arrived at the door. Tong Jinye had already been waiting in the room when he received the news. "Sir Minister." Renbochin cupped his fists and greeted. "The things that you mentioned previously have been brought back. Let's go and take a look first." Tong Jinye impatiently pulled Renbochin out. He had been waiting anxiously for a long time. At this moment, he didn't even want to say a word of nonsense. Tong Jinye pulled Renbochin all the way to a room at the back of the Ministry of Works. Then, he stopped, pointed to the front and said, "The things that you want are all here." Renbochin didn't know what the room in front of him was used for previously. Now, it was completely empty. There were piles upon piles of all kinds of things. There were limestone, gypsum stones, clay, feldspar, dolomite, and there was even a pile of coal at the side. Renbochin didn't really understand these things previously. He could only rely on the things recorded on the papers in his hands to distinguish them. It seemed like there wasn't any problem. He hoped that the ores in this world weren't too different from those on Earth. "Do you have iron ore?" Renbochin turned his head and asked. "How much do you need?" Tong Jinye asked in a deep voice. "Just a little." "1 cartload will do," Renbochin said. Iron or powder was needed to make cement. However, this material could be produced at the Mount Liuzue iron mine. He didn't mention it previously, but now that he was going to make it, he needed it. Now, the first thing he had to do was to burn some of the cement according to the formula that he had obtained from the internet. He wanted to see if there were any differences from those on Earth. If there were any problems, he would have to try to adjust the formula bit by bit. That would be a little troublesome. When there were no problems with the cement formula, he could prepare for the large-scale mining and transportation of materials for production. "Yes. Is there any place in the city with clay kilns?" Renbochin asked again. "There aren't any in the city, but there are some outside the city," Tong Jinye replied while stroking his beard. Chapter 229. He instructed the Ministry of Works to send the ore to the kiln outside the city to be crushed. Renbochin made an appointment the next day to go to the Department of Agriculture and Livestock to look for Guihong. He instructed him on how to germinate sweet potatoes, how to plant them, and where to plant them. At present, they had already tried the yield and taste of sweet potatoes. Therefore, they didn't have any doubts about this new product. All Renbochin had to do was to recite the information and let them memorize it. He didn't need to worry about anything else as they would naturally do it. Furthermore, even if all the sweet potatoes germinated, they could only be sown on 100 mu of land. After generations of cultivation and a small amount of sweet potatoes were put on the market, the ordinary people in Dayo would gradually accept it. When the yield of sweet potatoes increased, they would then take out sweet potato wine and sweet potato vermicelli. There were also some things to pay attention to. For example, sweet potatoes could only be planted once a year on the same plot of land. After that, other crops had to be planted. For example, eating too many sweet potatoes would cause heartburn. At the same time, Renbochin also brought two other crops. One was potatoes. The yield was lower than sweet potatoes. It could yield about 2,000 to 3,000 caddies per mu. The other was pumpkin seeds. The yield was similar to that of potatoes. These two crops and sweet potatoes had a high starch content. They could be used as a vegetable or as a rice. Furthermore, the yield wasn't low. They were excellent as a non-staple food. It could be said that with these three crops, Dayo would no longer have to worry about food shortages in a few years. In fact, 10 years later, the grain production of the other countries would increase greatly. After all, these few countries were close to each other. These crops could easily drift to other countries. To Renbochin, 2,000 to 3,000 caddies per mu wasn't a shocking number. However, when Guihong heard that these two crops could produce 2,000 to 3,000 caddies per mu, he opened his mouth wide and was speechless for a long time. Then, he looked up to the sky and laughed endlessly. He shook the dust off the beam and landed on both of their heads. A few days ago, if someone said that the crops could produce a few thousand caddies per mu, he would probably laugh 3 times and get someone to chase the person out. It was simply a fantasy. However, after seeing the sweet potatoes being dug out from the ground and weighing more than 6,000 caddies, he would attach great importance to anything that Renbochin took out. Bah! Renbochin patted the dust off his head with all his might. Just now, his entire head and face were covered with dust, but the main culprit, Guihong, was already at the door in a flash, leaving Renbochin to dig himself out from the ground. Renbochin did not look much better after dusting off most of the dust on his body. He was so angry that he glared at Guihong. Even though Guihong was a secondary class, rank 3 martial artist, and he was only a secondary class, rank 5 martial artist, Renbochin was not afraid of him. There was still a woman standing behind him. There was a saying that a successful man had the shadow of a woman behind him. Renbochin felt that this saying wasn't wrong at all. Even though he wasn't successful yet, there was still a shadow behind him. Guihong didn't care, and his expression didn't change. Renbochin kept staring at him, but he acted as if he did not see it. Instead, he asked Renbochin how to grow potatoes and pumpkins and what he needed to pay attention to. Even though Renbochin was angry, he still had to finish what he had to say. Otherwise, he would have to make another trip back. Renbochin explained the main points and precautions for growing potatoes and pumpkins. One of the most important points was that Dayo often ate mutton, and pumpkins couldn't be consumed together with mutton. After he finished explaining, Renbochin didn't stay any longer and quickly bade farewell. Deputy Prefect Ren, why don't you come to the Department of Agriculture and Livestock? It just so happens that we are still lacking a junior official. Deputy Prefect Ren is the most suitable for this position. Guihong still wanted to persuade Renbochin. At the door, an official wearing a secondary class, rank 4 official uniform looked at him with a hidden bitterness, just like an abandoned wife. Not interested, goodbye. Renbochin left without another word. Even now, he still felt that there was dirt in his mouth. Sir. After Renbachien left, the junior official of the Department of Agriculture and Livestock still looked at Gui Hong with a hidden bitterness. Sigh, if he can come to the Department of Agriculture and Livestock, I can resign from my position and hand it over to you. Gui Hong didn't look ashamed at all. Instead, he patiently tried to persuade the junior official of the Department of Agriculture and Livestock. The junior official of the Department of Agriculture and Livestock rolled his eyes. As if you can decide. At this position, you can't just recommend someone. In the morning, Renbachien came out of the palace clean and tidy. In the afternoon, he returned to the palace dejected. He hurriedly took a bath and went to Qingxin Palace Hall to learn how to read. At night, he stayed in his room and strolled around the courtyard. He raised his head and looked at the two moons in the sky, one big and one small. The big one was slightly bigger than the one on Earth. Its color was slightly red. With the naked eye, not only could he see the traces of craters, but he could also see a small dot in the middle. What's that? Renbachien was puzzled. In the past, he didn't notice it when he occasionally raised his head. Today, he took a closer look and discovered the small dot. He quickly ran into his room to take a look again. The 10x binoculars allowed him to see more clearly. He raised his binoculars and looked up. Indeed, it was much clearer and the moon was much bigger. He carefully searched for the dot that he saw just now. It was an oval object on the moon. He didn't notice it before. Now that he used the binoculars to look at it, it was as if there was an eye there. It made him feel a little weird, as if someone was looking at him. However, Renbachien also knew that this was impossible. He reckoned that it was some strange landform. If he had the opportunity, he should get an astronomical telescope to see what the moon in this world looked like. Of course, this idea was only on a whim. He would completely forget about it the next morning. Sitting on a stone bench in the garden, Renbachien took out his walkie-talkie and called the Empress. After a while, he heard some noise. The other party had picked up the walkie-talkie, but the Empress didn't speak. Instead, she waited for him to speak. Your Majesty. I see that the moon tonight is really beautiful, so I want to tell you. Renbachien thought for a long time and finally came up with this sentence. If one were to describe his current behavior, it was similar to a primary school student who liked to secretly pull the braids of a girl sitting in front of him. However, it became harassment through the walkie-talkie at night. In the end, he was still too free now. After all, on Earth, he could still watch movies or surf the internet. In this world, he had nothing to do. At this time, he didn't want to cultivate, so he simply used the walkie-talkie to idle around. After he finished speaking, he was still waiting for the Empress to reply when he realized that the other party had directly turned off the walkie-talkie. Renbachien looked bored. Finally, he looked at the sky at a 45-degree angle and said, "This is life." After standing in the courtyard for a while, he turned around and returned to the house to cultivate. Meanwhile, on the roof of Yangxin Palace Hall, the Empress was lying on it. She held a wine pot in one hand and poured it into her mouth from time to time. Looking at the two full moons in the sky, her face was slightly red. It seemed that the alcohol had gotten to her head, and her eyes were slightly blurred. What is Her Majesty looking at? Qin Yuan and Hong Yuan were looking at the roof at a 45-degree angle. I don't know. Recently, Her Majesty has been getting weirder. But recently, Her Majesty rarely gets angry. Qin Yuan's words made Hong Yuan nod her head incessantly. Furthermore, recently, Her Majesty wasn't as cold as before. Sometimes, she would even reveal a trace of a smile. This kind of change made the two of them very happy. Bang! Half a tile directly fell on the ground near the two of them, giving them a shock. They quickly covered their mouths and didn't say anything. They looked at each other and their eyes curved. The Empress looked at the moon for a long time, but she couldn't tell what was so beautiful about it. However, her mood wasn't bad. There was a kind of warm feeling, and at the same time, something was surging in her heart. This made her like it very much. Chapter 230. The next morning, Renbachien went out to meet up with Tong Zhenye, Feng Ho, and Zhehongba from the Department of Ordnance. The group of people, along with their guards, went straight to the east of the city. Renbachien rode the four-corned cow, the most common mount on the plains of Dayo. From time to time, it would twist its buttocks as if there were nails below it. This thing was indeed uncomfortable to ride and was much worse than the mountain-gazing bird. However, riding the mountain-gazing bird in the crowd required a lot of courage. Not to mention the déjà vu of a BMW riding on an alto, the faint but pungent smell was enough to push most people far away. This was the first time Renbachien walked in the direction of the east gate of Lan City. After leaving the east gate and walking for 2 incense sticks, he turned north for an hour and saw a small hill. From afar, he could see black smoke rising from it. When he got closer, he saw a wall that was as tall as a person surrounded by rocks. Right in front of it was a cold and cheerless gate. This was Jingtian Furnace. The iron ore from Mount Liuzue would usually be smelted in the small town outside the mountain before being transported here like the iron ore from Mount Damo. When the guard saw them from afar, he opened the gate. After everyone entered, they saw a large open space with scattered piles of iron ore, copper ore, and a large pile of dried firewood. The ores that Renbachien saw at the Ministry of Works yesterday were also transported here and piled up in piles at the side. Someone was crushing them. A few fierce-looking burly men first placed the limestone ore on a metal plate. Then, with a slap, it immediately turned into a pile of small fragments. After a while, a pile of gravel appeared on the metal plate. Then, someone transported it to the other metal plate. A huge stone roller was placed on top of the metal plate. It was similar to the roller in front of a road roller. 2 people, one on the left and one on the right, pushed the huge stone roller forward, turning the gravel into a pile of even smaller gravel. Then, they pushed it back. After a few times, there was a piece of stone powder and a small amount of slag on the metal plate. Then, someone took it to the side and used a sieve to sift out the powder. When everyone turned their heads to look at them, the people from the Ministry of Works hurriedly came out to greet them and lead them inside. Rather than calling it an earthen kiln, it would be more accurate to say that it was a cylinder made of mud. It had a diameter of 2 meters and a height of 3 meters. After placing the iron ore inside, a large amount of firewood was placed inside to melt it. The speed was very slow, and a relatively rare kind of firewood called burning wood was needed to push the temperature to the point where the iron could be melted. Then the molten iron would flow out through a trough at the bottom. The iron obtained in this way was very soft and contained a lot of impurities. It also required a blacksmith to beat the impurities out after heating it up for a long time. It could be said that this method of smelting and forging iron was quite inefficient. Not only was it time-consuming, but it also consumed a lot of firewood. As Renbachien walked, he listened to the official from the Ministry of Works explaining the process here and nodded to show that he understood. However, as Renbachien walked in, he saw a few furnaces with huge boxes that were as tall as a person placed beside them. Someone was constantly pushing the boxes into the furnaces. It was the bellows that Renbachien and Feng Ho had mentioned previously. With this bellows, the temperature in the furnace has increased significantly and the speed of smelting iron has also increased. I still have to thank Deputy Prefect Ren, Feng Ho nodded and said to Renbachien. The official from the Ministry of Works looked at Renbachien after hearing this. From Feng Ho's words, he could tell that this blower was suggested by him. When will the other bellows be ready? Feng Ho asked the official from the Ministry of Works. They will be ready in 2 days, the official quickly replied. Have the raw materials for the cement been prepared according to the proportion? Ren Baqin asked Tong Jinye. Tong Jinye looked at Feng Ho looked at Zhihongbo, and Zhihongbo looked at the official. Sir, are these the stones that were delivered yesterday? They have been prepared according to the instructions, the official quickly replied. Ren Baqin looked at the few of them and saw them looking at one another. He felt that he might as well have asked this official from the start. How should I address you? Sir Deputy Prefect, I am the supervisor of Jingtian furnaces. You can call me Tai Mu. If you have any questions, you can ask me, Tai Mu cupped his fists and said. The husband chosen by the Empress was the only one in the imperial court who wasn't an aboriginal. Anyone could recognize him. Needless to say, he was an official in Lon City. Bring the raw materials for the cement over. Ren Baqin nodded and said, let's see what the results are. Following which, someone brought the raw cement powder over. Ren Baqin took a look and saw that it was filled with the sifted powder. After that, he found an empty furnace and added firewood to it. Then, he filled a hollow pillar made of clay with small holes with cement and placed it into the empty furnace. After a while, thick smoke rose from the top of the clay furnace and spread in all directions. Everyone retreated to a distance to watch. In order to make the temperature meet Ren Baqin's requirements, there was another person in the thick smoke who was covering his nose and blowing the bellows. He coughed from time to time and was replaced by someone else. How long do we need to burn this? Tong Jinye asked. It shouldn't take too long. It will be fine as long as the temperature is met. Ren Baqin wasn't too sure either. The information he obtained only mentioned what happened to the cement at a certain temperature, but it didn't say how long it would take. Let's try to make bricks, Ren Baqin said as he looked at the surrounding empty clay furnaces. Originally, he was going to build a brick furnace after the cement was burned. However, looking at this clay furnace now, Ren Baqin felt that he could give it a try. In any case, he had nothing to do. They had already retrieved the clay for some time. Even though it wasn't dried, it had been weathered for a long time and should be enough to make bricks. Following which, the craftsman of Jingtian furnace followed his instructions and poured the clay powder into the trough. Then, they stirred it into a mud-like state. Following which, they kneaded out pieces of brick embryos and placed them around the walls of the clay furnace. After which, they added wood to the middle and started to calcine it. I'm afraid this will take about 10 days to burn. Don't cut off the fire in the middle, Ren Baqin said to Tai Mu. Tai Mu promptly noted it down. Up until now, he still didn't know what these big shots wanted to do with the clay. In any case, they would do as they instructed. Currently, there was nothing much to do in Jingtian furnace and it would be idle for at least half a month. The firing of the cement was very fast. Before the sky turned dark, the fire was extinguished and the temperature was lowered rapidly. Then, they took out the clay jar and poured the cement on the ground. Originally, it had already been sintered into lumps. When it fell to the ground, it broke into small pieces. Everyone looked at Ren Baqin. Was this the cement that was similar to stone that he mentioned? Ren Baqin squatted beside the pile of clinker and used his hand to grab a handful of it. In his hand, there were some glass-like crystals that were sintered at a high temperature just now. This is a gem. Feng Ho was astonished at first. Following which, he revealed an expression as if he had discovered a huge secret. When it was sent in just now, it was clearly clay. How could there be gems in it after it came out? Even though it was very small and fragmented and wasn't worth much, it was still a gem. It was much more valuable than this clay. Even though it didn't turn into stone like what Ren Baqin said, if it could produce gems from the clay, it would still be a big step forward. But immediately, everyone's imagination started to run wild. Where was this clay dug from? Tomorrow, they would send someone to dig the clay. Chapter 231. In the garden, the Empress was in a daze as she looked at a small white flower not far away from her. Someone seemed to have told her that this flower was outstanding. When she recalled the serious look on that person's face at that time, she suddenly laughed. Renbochin turned around and asked Hong Wan, "Where did Deputy Prefect Ren go?" "Deputy Prefect Ren went to the Ministry of Works," Hong Wan answered. The Empress nodded slightly. Soon after, she recalled something and said to Qing Yuan and Hong Wan, "Get someone to use the Yinyao to inform the General-in-Chief who supports the nation to find Lu Qi, Lu Pinghai, and bring the item back. As long as he's willing to trade, he can ask for anything." "Yes," Hong Wan hurriedly replied and hurriedly left. In Jingtian Furnace, Tong Zhenye, Feng Ho, and a few others took the crystalline particles in the cement and placed them under the sun to examine them. They emitted all kinds of rays of light and confirmed that they were indeed not gems. However, they really did look like gems. Mix the gypsum powder and these stones according to the ratio of 3:97. Renbochin continued to instruct the craftsmen of Jingtian Furnace to mix the cement and clinker. If there were no problems, this would be cement. As for the specifics, they would know once it was mixed with coarse sand, mixed with water, and left for a night. Everyone brought the cement and coarse sand that had been mixed evenly with the gypsum powder all the way back to the Ministry of Works. They couldn't wait to find a place in the backyard to pour the cement and coarse sand together according to the ratio, then add water and mix. Renbochin found 2 stones to be used as bricks and covered the middle and 4 sides with cement powder. He was waiting to see the results tomorrow. "All right, come back tomorrow morning and we'll know the specifics." Renbochin looked at the sky and said. Dayo's current weather was still very hot. It could reach a temperature of 32 to 33 degrees Celsius, which made people perspire profusely. This cement should be enough for one night. After returning to the palace, the first thing he did was to head straight to Qingxin Palace Hall to learn how to read. When the sky darkened, he stood up and left. Lin Chaola saw him stand up and shouted. "What's wrong?" Renbochin looked down at her. Lin Chaola looked around and then asked, "I heard from them that Her Majesty has chosen you as her husband." Renbochin thought for a while. That was the case. Should he be considered as marrying into her family now? "Why?" Lin Chaola asked with her eyes wide open. Renbochin spread his hands and thought, "You're really slow to react. It's been a few months, and you only found out about it today. How closed off must you be? But about this question, if you ask me, who should I ask? Everything happened too quickly." The wheel of fate rolled forward, and he was in a daze for a long time. "You're so ugly and weak. I can knock you down with just a finger," Lin Chaola said with a look of disdain. "Why would Her Majesty choose you?" Renbochin's face darkened immediately. Could they still converse? He stretched out his finger and poked Lin Chaola's forehead. If he knew how to use the 6-pulse divine sword, he would definitely be yubu today. "No wonder you don't have any friends. It's been a few months and you only know about it now," Renbochin said with a look of disdain. "What is a friend?" Lin Chaola suddenly asked. "I have seen it in many books, but what is a friend?" Renbochin looked at the little girl and suddenly couldn't bear to argue with her. At the end of the day, he was a child who grew up here and did nothing but eat and sleep every day until he was 17 or 18 years old. Her chances of making friends were lower than winning the lottery. It was as if a meteorite had hit her on the head. Wives are like limbs and friends are like clothes. Having no friends is equivalent to running around naked, Renbochin said sincerely after pondering for a while. Lin Chaola looked at Renbochin and pondered for a long time. Then, she said with a look of disdain, "Pervert. That's why I should still make a few friends if I have the opportunity, Renbochin said. After he left, Lin Chaolo was in a daze. She had seen the word friend many times, but she never knew what it meant. Renbochin went to Yangxin Palace Hall. Dinner was already served, but the Empress didn't move. She was in a daze and no one knew what she was thinking about. Your Majesty. Renbochin greeted. Oh. The Empress came back to her senses and asked, "How's the matter at the Ministry of Works today?" There were only a few things that Renbochin could do at the Ministry of Works. All of them were very important to Deo, and the Empress wanted to know the progress. Actually, if she wanted to, she could let the Ministry of Works report to her. However, she wanted to hear from Renbochin. After all, he had a better understanding of this matter. We still don't know the results. We will only know tomorrow, Renbochin said. If it's successful, Deo will be able to build some taller buildings. Furthermore, if we want to build city walls, we won't need to dig up stones from afar and transport them here. We can save a lot of labor. The Empress nodded her head and said, "Tell me the situation when the time comes." "Accompany me for dinner," the Empress said as she straightened her body from the couch. Renbochin felt that she was waiting for him. With a smile on his face, he poured wine for the Empress. After dinner, Renbochin asked curiously, "Your Majesty, don't you need to train?" He had been curious about this question for a long time. He had seen other aboriginals train their bodies every day, but he had never seen the Empress do this. Logically speaking, for her to reach this level of strength at such a young age, besides her innate talent, she should be 100 times more hardworking than others, right? However, what Renbochin saw was not even 100-fold, let alone 100 times. The Empress shook her head slightly and said, "I'm training all the time." Renbochin didn't understand, but he didn't ask any further. He seemed to understand and said, "So, walking, eating, sleeping, and sitting are all part of your training, right?" The Empress shook her head and explained, "I'm training all the time. I walk, sit, and lie down." The Aboriginals you see practice four-way heaven and Kismet heaven. They use their bodies as heaven and earth to train their bodies. Cardinal heaven experts are already able to control heaven and earth. Naturally, they don't need to train like them. Renbochin understood what she meant. However, even if the Empress explained it to him, he wouldn't understand, so he simply didn't ask. "Your Majesty, do you want to play Gamoku?" Renbochin suddenly thought of something and asked. The Empress didn't even look at him when she heard this. She had lost interest in such things after losing the previous time. It was unknown what she was thinking, but she suddenly looked up at Renbochin and said, "Since you are so free, why don't you sing that song for me?" Renbochin spat out a mouthful of blood. The Empress still remembered this. With a conflicted look on her face, she said, "Your Majesty, let me bring the era back to play Pomp and Circumstance for you." "All right. However, you have to remember that if you have forgotten, I have heard of a term that is prepared for this. It's called the crime of deceiving the monarch," the Empress said unhurriedly. Renbochin almost knelt down when he heard this. Was this what he learned from watching the Qing dynasty drama? Indeed, he shouldn't have let her watch those messy things. "Your Majesty." Renbochin looked up at the Empress's face and said, "How can I forget what I promised?" Only after Renbochin left did the Empress reveal a trace of a smile on her face. She picked up the wine cup and poured it into her mouth. Inexplicably, she thought of a sentence from the movie that she watched a few days ago, "The more wine you drink, the warmer you get. The more water you drink, the colder it gets." Now, her heart was warm. Chapter 232. The next morning, Renbochin came to the Ministry of Works again and asked Tong Jingye, "Minister, how's the cement?" "Let's go and take a look together," Tong Jingye said. I haven't had the time to see it either. They walked to the backyard but didn't see Feng Ho and Zhihongbo. After all, they were officials with actual positions and had to deal with many things every day. They didn't have the time to keep an eye on a piece of cement and only needed to know the results. Tong Jinye was the Minister of Works, so he could see things further than others. Thus, he paid more attention to the cement. When they arrived at the backyard, they saw a pile of cement that was mixed yesterday and a block that was used to cover the outside of 2 stones. Ren Boqian stepped forward and touched it with his toes. It was very hard. Is it done? Ren Boqian was delighted. He was most afraid that the ores in this world were different from those on Earth. After all, this was a different world and he didn't even know if they were in the same universe. Furthermore, this world had spirit swords and superior martial strength. It was normal to have some differences in the details. He tested the hardness of the cement with his foot and saw hope of success. He squatted down and pressed it with his finger. It was indeed hard like a stone. He then checked the cement that was used to cover the 2 stones. It was completely solidified and wrapped around the stones. He lifted it up and threw it to the ground with all his might. Even a corner of the stone slab was broken, and only a piece of cement was chipped. It's done. There's no problem with the cement, Ren Boqian said happily. Tong Jinye saw Ren Boqian's actions and nodded his head slightly. He bent over and touched the cement block before slapping it with his palm. The pile of cement on the ground immediately broke into pieces, and a few pieces directly fell on Ren Boqian's body. Ren Boqian took a deep breath. He wasn't shocked, but in pain. A piece of cement had directly hit his shin bone. Ouch, ouch, ouch. Ren Boqian hugged his calf and jumped non-stop. It's slightly worse than the stones, but it's fine. Although a lot of materials are needed, it's much easier than quarrying, grinding, and transporting them here. Tong Jinye nodded and turned to look at Ren Boqian with a pained expression. He then turned his gaze away and pretended not to see it. He thought about it and felt that Ren Boqian had a lot of good stuff. Perhaps there was something else that he wanted, so he apologized. I'm sorry. After jumping for a long time, Ren Boqian pulled up his trousers and saw that his calf was bruised and bleeding. After thinking about it, he realized that he couldn't argue with Tong Jinye over this matter. Since the aboriginals were so careless, he could only blame himself for being unlucky. Next, we'll store more of this cement and wait for 10 days to see how the red bricks turn out. If there are no problems, we'll build the brick kiln first. Once the furnace is ready, we can start with the production of cement and bricks. Once, we can build the blast furnace. Moreover, this kind of blast furnace was also quite effective in smelting iron. It could even directly smelt steel, saving a lot of effort. In addition, cement had many other uses, such as paving roads. There was no need for stone slabs, and the cement could be directly laid on them. The same goes for repairing the city walls and other areas. Therefore, the more the better. In the future, the consumption of this thing will definitely not be small, Ren Boqian said to Tong Jinye while rubbing his leg. I understand. I will write to Her Majesty today and ask her to assign manpower. Tong Jinye nodded. He didn't doubt Ren Boqian's words. Even if Ren Boqian didn't mention it, he would have thought of it in a few days. If this cement was used well, it was indeed a sharp weapon, especially for the Ministry of Works. Then, he looked at Ren Boqian and said, the cement that Deputy Prefect Ren brought out is very useful for Dayo and the Ministry of Works. In order to thank you, I will hold a banquet for you at House Yunyan tonight. Everyone from the Ministry of Works will be there. Deputy Prefect Ren, you must come. Ren Boqian nodded his head cheerfully. This was the first time a big shot from the imperial court invited him to a banquet. He didn't know if it was a sign of acceptance. After all, He couldn't always rely on the Empress and wander around the palace every day. He hoped that this was a good start so that he could quickly integrate into Dao's imperial court. After leaving the Ministry of Works, Renbachien went straight to the Beast Park. Not long after he entered, he saw caretaker Sher playing with the stone dumbbell. The stone dumbbell, which weighed about 25 to 30 kilograms, was flying up and down in his hands. His whole body was drenched in sweat. Noticing Renbachien's arrival, caretaker Sher's hands trembled and the stone dumbbell was smashed into the house. Deputy Prefect Ren. Caretaker Sher didn't even take a look at the loud bang and the dust that rose up from behind him. He gave off the feeling that a real man would never turn back to look at an explosion. Caretaker Sher. Renbachien smiled. I was still wondering when Deputy Prefect Ren would come. The shaved ice shops have earned a total of more than 400 taels of silver in the past 2 months. Also, the fans made by Deputy Prefect Ren have earned 200 taels of silver. I will just take a share of the shaved ice shop's profits. I should give Deputy Prefect Ren 450 taels of silver. It wasn't easy for me to see Deputy Prefect Ren these days. I was still thinking about how to give it to you. Caretaker Sher beamed with joy when he mentioned this matter. The shaved ice shops had earned more than 400 taels of silver in the past 2 months. Caretaker Sher also received more than 200 taels of silver. This year, he would have an income of around 1,000 taels of silver. To him, this was definitely a huge sum of money. Of course, what he didn't expect the most was that Renbachien had risen again and again within these few months. From a caretaker who was 1 rank lower than him, he directly rose to the position of secondary class, rank 5 Imperial Deputy Prefect. Even this position of Imperial Deputy Prefect was not taken seriously by anyone. The important thing was that he was chosen as the Empress's husband. Thinking about the changes in the past few months, caretaker Sher sighed. Recently, Renbachien didn't pay much attention to this aspect. After hearing caretaker Sher's words, he then recalled the previous mess. Even though money didn't have much meaning to him now, he was still somewhat happy to receive more than 400 taels of silver. It was not bad to use it as a reward for others. Most importantly, this business belonged to him. It was completely different from what the Empress gave him. How's the shaved ice business recently? Renbachien smiled and asked. The shaved ice is still doing well, but we can't make that fan anymore. Now, a few shops are selling it, caretaker Sher said with slight regret. It's all right, Renbachien replied indifferently. Originally, he wanted to say that he would sell good stuff to him in the future, but he swallowed the words when they were at the tip of his tongue. Based on caretaker Sher's status, the current business was already his limit. If he increased his business any further, it would be hard to guarantee that someone would be jealous. At least on Earth, it was like that. As for the future, it would depend on caretaker Sher's luck. If he had the opportunity to give him a few pointers, he would definitely earn a lot from it. At the same time, his friendship with Renbachien was not in vain. When the time comes, I will get someone to collect it. This time, I am here to look for 2 people from caretaker Sher, Renbachien said to caretaker Sher. No problem, caretaker Sher readily agreed. Get Tinghulu and Tai Dao here, I will ask them if they are willing to work for me. How can they not be willing? These days, they have been thinking about Sir Deputy Prefect. They are afraid that Deputy Prefect will forget about them. Caretaker Sher laughed heartily. After a while, Tinghulu and Tai Dao were found. When they saw Renbachien, they greeted him happily. Are the 2 of you willing to work for me? Renbachien looked at them and asked. Of course we are willing. Our subordinates thank Sir Deputy Prefect for still remembering us, the 2 of them were overjoyed. Working for Renbachien was a good thing. Even in the past, the 2 of them would not have rejected him. Not to mention, Renbachien's status had risen. The 2 of them were self-aware. Their strength was rather average. If not for the fact that they had submitted to Rinpoche when he was still a caretaker, they would not have had the chance to do such a thing. That's good, this token is for the two of you. Look for me at the palace tomorrow morning. As for your accommodation, the two of you can rent a place in the city and get the money from caretaker. Sure, Rinpoche said. He was the one who asked for this token from the Empress. After all, regardless of whether it was the farmland or some of his other ideas, he needed someone to do it. After meeting the few of them, Rinpoche returned to the palace. He first inquired about the Empress's location and then went to the garden. After all, he still had to inform the Empress that he was going to attend the banquet at night. Actually, there were only a few places that the Empress usually stayed at. She would either stay at Yangxin Palace Hall or the garden. Occasionally, she would go to places like Qingxin Palace Hall and the Beast Park. To Rinpoche, it was very boring. Upon seeing the Empress, Rinpoche greeted her and sat at one side with a face full of joy. Your Majesty, the cement is a success. It's a good thing, but now that you have no more rewards, I won't reward you, the Empress nodded her head and said. She had seen the tall buildings on earth and knew more about the importance of cement than Tongzhenye. Rinpoche laughed, to be able to stay by your Majesty's side is the greatest reward. After the Empress heard this, she raised her head slightly and squinted her eyes as she basked in the sunlight. She always liked to hear these words from him. The two of them just sat there and occasionally exchanged a few words. Most of the time, they were silent. The main reason was that the Empress did not talk much and Rinpoche could not say much even if he wanted to. However, the two of them were very relaxed and the atmosphere was very warm. Even Qing Yuan and Hong Wuan stood a little further away to not disturb the two of them. After lunch, Rinpoche told the Empress about Tongzhenye's invitation to attend the banquet. The Empress nodded her head and thought for a while before asking, "What place is it?" "House Yunyan," Rinpoche replied. "Well, I got it." The Empress said, "Change your clothes in the evening and prepare to go. If you encounter anything interesting, tell me about it when you come back." Rinpoche then left for Qingxin Palace Hall. In the evening, he changed his clothes and headed for House Yunyan. When he mentioned the location, the surrounding imperial guards had a strange expression on their faces. "Why? Is there something wrong with that place?" Rinpoche asked doubtfully. Everyone's expression became even more strange. There was nothing wrong with that place. It was indeed a good place. The key was that the person who went there was not right. Sir, Great Xia calls that place a brothel. Su Wei, who was the leader of the guards assigned by the Empress, couldn't help but say to Rinpoche, "You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure."